They called it the war to end all wars, but not all battles were fought on muddy fields, and not every secret died in the trenches. As the smoke cleared over shattered cities and endless rows of white crosses stretched across Europe, a deeper layer of the Great War remained hidden, veiled in silence, lost documents, and whispers that refused to fade. From ghostly battalions that vanished without a trace, to encrypted messages no codebreaker could ever solve. From bizarre experiments conducted beneath the cover of war, to ancient relics unearthed on the battlefield and quietly disappeared, World War I left behind more than scars. It left mysteries. Why did an entire regiment of soldiers vanish on a clear day in Gallipoli? What strange object was recovered from a downed German Zeppelin, and why was it sealed away? And who or what was spotted moving in no man's land, long after both sides had fallen silent? History remembers the politics, the alliances, the armistice, but it forgot the questions left unanswered. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into the shadows of a war you thought you knew, and the mysteries you were never told. The Gallipoli Peninsula, in the early hours of August 12, 1915, was a harsh and unforgiving landscape. Dry, wind-swept ridges sloping down toward the Aegean Sea, littered with shattered stone, thorny brush, and the remnants of brutal combat. Dust clung to everything. The air, thick with salt and gunpowder, hung low over the earth like a veil of fatigue. In the distance, the faint rumble of artillery echoed across the hills, occasionally broken by the sharp crack of rifle fire. It was here, amid the chaos and confusion of the Suvla Bay offensive, that one of World War I's strangest stories would take root, a tale not of strategy or victory, but of silence. A tale of disappearance. The 1/5th Battalion of the Royal Norfolk Regiment, made up largely of men from the King's Sandringham estate, had been ordered to advance through enemy territory, pushing inland toward the village of Anafarta. Under the punishing August sun, they moved up a dry creek bed, later identified as Kavak Dere, climbing toward the high ground where Ottoman forces were thought to be entrenched. It was a textbook maneuver, albeit one filled with risk. Yet what happened next was anything but ordinary. According to surviving witnesses, men from adjacent units and elements of the New Zealand Expeditionary Force stationed nearby, the Norfolk soldiers marched steadily into the low hills and never returned. They were seen advancing into a strange, dense mist that had gathered on the slope ahead. It was unlike the usual morning fog or battlefield smoke. This cloud hovered low, unnaturally compact, glowing faintly in the sunlight. The soldiers entered the mist in orderly formation. Minutes passed, then hours. But no gunfire came from the far side, no signs of combat, no returning survivors. The mist lifted. The ridge lay still. The Royal Norfolks were gone. In the immediate aftermath, British commanders assumed the worst, that the battalion had been surrounded and annihilated in battle. But there were no bodies, no blood-soaked uniforms, no shell craters or wreckage, nothing that spoke of a struggle, just silence and a curious emptiness where a company of over 260 men had once been. For years, the official version remained vague. The men were declared missing in action. Some were presumed buried where they fell, or lost in an undocumented skirmish. But families back home, especially those from Sandringham, questioned the narrative. Their loved ones hadn't fallen in battle, they insisted. They had vanished. Then, decades later, a strange testimony emerged. In 1965, 3 veterans from the New Zealand Field Artillery claimed to have seen an event that defied conventional explanation. In a signed affidavit, they described observing a solid, loaf-shaped cloud sitting just above the ground into which the Norfolks entered. The cloud, they said, lingered for an extended period, then slowly rose upward and drifted away, against the wind. When the cloud was gone, so were the men. Skeptics dismissed the story as unreliable, a combination of war trauma, memory decay, and the allure of myth. And yet, no alternative explanation was ever definitively proven. In the years that followed, other fragments of evidence surfaced, each offering new clues and new contradictions. In 1918, after the Ottoman Empire's surrender, British authorities were finally permitted to search the Gallipoli battlefield. They found the bodies of 180 British soldiers scattered in a small ravine. Many wore badges and insignia consistent with the Royal Norfolks. Oddly, none showed signs of being buried. Most lay exposed, as though left behind or forgotten. The terrain matched the approximate area of the battalion's last known location, but the numbers didn't add up. The unit had numbered over 260. What happened to the others? Adding to the puzzle were inconsistencies in the Turkish records. The Ottoman commanders, including General Lyman von Sanders, reported no large-scale engagement with British forces in that sector on that day. No capture of enemy troops, no decisive ambush. It was as though the Royal Norfolks had never arrived. With each new layer of inquiry, the mystery only deepened. Some historians have speculated that the men may have been killed in a little-known firefight, their remains later lost to landslides or erosion. Others suggest the possibility of a communication failure. Perhaps the soldiers advanced too far, became isolated, and were picked off over several days in smaller skirmishes. But even these practical theories struggle to explain the sheer absence of evidence and the lack of detail in contemporary accounts. And then there are the more speculative interpretations. Some fringe researchers have pointed to meteorological anomalies, suggesting the possibility of a rare natural phenomenon known as earth fog, capable of disorienting troops and creating optical illusions. Others have ventured further into the realm of the unexplained, drawing connections to electromagnetic disturbances, time slips, or even extraterrestrial encounters. While none of these ideas are supported by mainstream science, their persistence in popular culture reflects a deeper fascination, a desire to make sense of something that, on the surface, makes no sense at all. Still others ask more philosophical questions. Did the fog represent something more symbolic than physical, a manifestation of confusion, fear, or the disintegration of order in the face of mechanized war? Could the story of the missing battalion be less about a literal vanishing and more about how trauma erases memory, how chaos swallows detail? Whatever the truth may be, one thing is clear. The fate of the Royal Norfolk Regiment remains one of the most haunting enigmas of the First World War. And in that silent ridge above Suvla Bay, beneath the sun-bleached stones and stubborn brush, the earth keeps its secrets. What really happened to the men of Sandringham that day? Were they victims of strategy, of nature, or of something stranger still? The answers may yet lie buried, beneath the dust of Gallipoli and beneath a century of silence. Just beyond the quiet streets of modern-day Mons, Belgium, where red brick houses and narrow lanes now cradle the stillness of a post-industrial town, lie open fields where something strange was once said to walk. On those same fields, under the thick, low clouds of August 1914, the air cracked with the thunder of artillery, the tremble of bootsteps, and the cries of the British Expeditionary Force, fighting its very first engagement in what was quickly becoming a global war. The Battle of Mons was a desperate stand. Outnumbered and outgunned, British troops fought to delay the advancing German army as it pushed into Belgium. Though they managed a disciplined resistance, the tide was too strong. They were forced into a hard retreat, moving south through unfamiliar countryside, surrounded by the chaos of collapsing lines and dwindling supplies. It was amid this retreat, under conditions of unimaginable stress and fatigue, that an extraordinary story began to circulate. Soldiers, it was said, had seen something in the skies. Others claimed it walked among them. Some whispered of a radiant figure cloaked in white, standing sentinel between them and the enemy. Others spoke of winged beings, bright and silent, floating above the battlefield. Some told of longbowmen in shining armor, loosing spectral arrows into the German ranks, men of another age answering a call from the present. The legend of the Angel of Mons had begun. At first, it was little more than a rumor, a tale shared in quiet voices over campfires and in trenches. But within weeks, the story exploded into the public sphere, amplified by an article that, for many, gave it substance. That article was a short story titled The Bowmen, published by the Welsh author Arthur Machen in the London Evening News. In it, Machen wrote of supernatural archers summoned by prayer to St. George, who miraculously intervened to aid the British at Mons. The tale, though fictional, was written in the tone of an eyewitness account. It struck a chord, and it spread. Machen was quick to clarify that his story was imaginary. But something curious happened. Soldiers began writing home, claiming to have seen what Machen had described. Testimonies followed, some vague, some vivid. Letters, diaries, and interviews began to mention glowing figures, waves of calm in the chaos of battle, and an uncanny sense that someone, or something, had been watching over them. What were they seeing? Could it have been a case of suggestion, of fragile minds already under tremendous psychological strain, retroactively filling in blanks with comforting illusions? It's a reasonable explanation. The early stages of World War I were marked by shock. The horror of mechanized warfare was new. It was unlike anything soldiers had prepared for. Under these conditions, mass hallucination, or the blending of memory and imagination, is not unthinkable. And yet, the details vary, enough to make one wonder. Some reports predate the spread of Machen's story. In these, soldiers speak of an overwhelming stillness in the air, of golden light pouring down from empty skies, and of shapes moving through smoke with grace and purpose. One officer claimed that he and his men felt a presence, something that calmed their fear and shielded their path. No glowing robes, no wings, just a sense that they weren't alone. Skeptics argue that natural phenomena may be at play. Could it have been a temperature inversion? A rare form of light refraction caused by mist and the angle of the sun? The human brain, when confronted with shifting light patterns, battlefield smoke, and sheer terror, may attempt to impose order, creating images that offer meaning where there is only chaos. Could such illusions have looked like angels? Others propose a more cultural explanation. The Victorian imagination was steeped in romanticism, medievalism, and spiritual symbolism. Many soldiers, products of that culture, would have naturally interpreted unexplainable sights or sensations through a biblical or mythical lens. The angel may have been less a literal being and more a mental construct, a psychic survival mechanism that turned fear into faith. Still, some go further. Over the years, more speculative theories have emerged. Some paranormal researchers have proposed that the Angel of Mons was not divine, but extraterrestrial. Could an advanced intelligence, witnessing human conflict, have intervened subtly, presenting itself in a form that would be most comforting to those it sought to help? Still others suggest interdimensional activity. The battlefield, soaked in fear and death, may have acted as a thin place, a point of contact between realities. In such moments, perhaps something from another realm became briefly visible. While these theories lie far outside accepted historical scholarship, they reflect a deeper truth. The story endures because it taps into something profound. In war, especially in its most terrifying, dehumanizing forms, people look for signs that they are not forgotten, not forsaken. The Angel of Mons may not be proof of divine intervention or otherworldly visitations, but it is proof of humanity's refusal to surrender to meaninglessness. and the mystery deepens when we consider the reaction of the German forces. Some accounts suggest that German units paused their advance after Mons, despite having the upper hand. Was it a tactical delay? Or did something unrecorded, something extraordinary, give them pause? There are no photographs, no confirmed consistent eyewitness reports that meet modern standards of verification. Machen's fictional account casts a long shadow, blurring the line between story and history. And yet, the soldiers believed. Some still do. Today, as the wind moves gently through the fields outside Mons, where poppies now grow among the remnants of trench lines, the question remains: what, if anything, did those men see? Was it the power of myth in real time? A collective vision shaped by need and terror? Or was there truly something there, in the smoke and silence between life and death? We may never know. But like all great mysteries of war, the Angel of Mons hovers between history and legend. Forever watching, forever unexplained, ever. It was just past midnight in the skies above London. The year was 1916. The city, cloaked in a wartime blackout, lay in uneasy silence. Street lamps had been dimmed. Curtains were drawn tight. Civilians waited in dread for the distant drone of engines, an all too familiar sign that danger had returned. And on this particular night, danger was expected. But what came instead would defy explanation. A low, humming sound broke the quiet, drawing eyes skyward. Witnesses reported a long, cigar-shaped object gliding over the rooftops, massive, silent, and silver-gray against the stars. Some swore it shimmered faintly, as though partially transparent. Others claimed it hovered unnaturally still before drifting eastward, then vanishing without a trace. No bombs were dropped, no sirens were sounded, but something had passed over the heart of the city. The newspapers would later refer to it as the Ghost Zeppelin. To understand the strangeness of that sighting, we must revisit the context of the time. Between 1915 and 1918, London was the target of more than 50 aerial raids by German Zeppelins and fixed-wing bombers. These silent giants, nearly 650 feet long, were capable of flying at altitudes beyond the reach of early British defenses. They brought with them the new and terrifying reality of air war. For many civilians, it was their first taste of violence from above. Most of these attacks were carefully documented. Airships were tracked, debris was recovered, pilots were identified. But scattered among these records are a handful of reports that do not fit the usual mold, accounts of aircraft that appeared with no warning, left no physical evidence, and behaved in ways no Zeppelin could. The most famous of these was the sighting over London in early October 1916. It was a clear night, with good visibility. Anti-aircraft units had been placed on high alert due to intelligence of an impending raid. But when the strange object appeared over the city, it defied every known pattern. Observers on the ground, including police constables and Home Guard volunteers, described it as eerily quiet. No engine noise, no propellers, no lights, at least none visible from the ground. Just the outline of a massive airship, slowly crossing the skyline, illuminated only by the ambient moonlight. What puzzled authorities was not just the object's silence or its odd shape, but its behavior. Unlike conventional Zeppelins, which had to follow prevailing winds and navigational constraints, the ghost airship moved fluidly and against the breeze. It hovered for long stretches. At one point, witnesses claimed it paused entirely in mid-air before vanishing into a thin patch of cloud. Searchlights swept the sky. Anti-aircraft guns were readied. But nothing was found. No alerts came from radar. What little existed of it at the time. No explosions, no crashes, and no reports from German command suggested a mission had taken place in that area on that night. So what, exactly, had Londoners seen? Skeptics argued it was mass hysteria. Tensions were high, people were on edge. A flock of birds, a drifting weather balloon, or a cloud bank illuminated by moonlight might have been enough to ignite the imagination. After all, eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable under stress. But not all witnesses were ordinary civilians. Some were trained spotters, men whose duty it was to identify aircraft. And what they described was unmistakable. A Zeppelin-shaped object, at low altitude, moving in ways that no rigid airship should. So, was it a German airship after all? Perhaps a failed mission? Quietly aborted? That theory was quickly dismissed. First, because the German military had records of all Zeppelin deployments, and none matched the time or location of the sighting. Second, because the object reportedly performed aerial maneuvers impossible for any known Zeppelin, especially in total silence. Even the most advanced models of the time produced a low rumble, detectable for miles. This one, they said, made no sound at all. As the mystery deepened, other theories began to surface. Some speculated that the Ghost Zeppelin might have been a prototype, an experimental airship from a secret British or German program. Could it have been a test flight, misidentified by civilians? A trial of a new form of aerial surveillance or stealth technology? No known blueprints have ever confirmed this, and no government, then or now, has admitted to such a craft being in the skies over London that night. And so, inevitably, more speculative ideas took root. Could the object have been something not of this earth? It's easy to dismiss the notion as science fiction, but it is worth noting that some of the earliest reports of unidentified flying objects bear a strong resemblance to dirigibles. In fact, the airship wave of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, long before the term UFO was coined, was filled with descriptions of cigar-shaped craft moving silently across the sky, often at night, and sometimes with glowing features or strange auras. Are we to believe, then, that the Ghost Zeppelin was part of this long pattern of unexplained sightings? If so, why appear during wartime? Why reveal itself above one of the world's most heavily guarded cities? Or perhaps we're asking the wrong questions. Maybe the Ghost Zeppelin wasn't a machine at all. Could it have been a residual image? What some call a time slip? A momentary reappearance of a past event, somehow projected into the present? There are legends of places retaining echoes of the past, especially where trauma or repetition occur. Could this have been the shadow of a previous raid, replayed like a film in the night sky? We cannot say for certain. The official record on the incident remains inconclusive. No enemy activity was confirmed. No physical evidence was ever found. And yet the reports remain, quiet, persistent, and strangely consistent. Even now, over a century later, the story of the Ghost Zeppelin floats silently through the annals of wartime mystery. What did they see above London that night? A machine? A mirage? Or a message? The answers, like the airship itself, may have drifted quietly into the clouds, never to return. The fields near the Somme River were quiet that morning, for just a moment. It was April 21st, 1918. Spring had begun to soften the ground, and in the pale dawn light, a crimson flash darted across the sky. Low and fast, a Fokker Dr. I triplane cut through the air like a blade, its red fuselage gleaming against the rising sun. Inside sat one of the most feared men of the war, the Red Baron, Manfred von Richthofen, a name that echoed across both sides of the Western Front. The German flying ace with 80 confirmed aerial victories. To his comrades, he was a legend. To his enemies, he was a ghost in a blood-red machine, swift, precise, unstoppable. But that day, over the rolling French countryside near Vaux-sur-Somme, the legend fell from the sky. The Red Baron's death was front-page news across the world. His triplane crashed behind Allied lines, his body recovered by Australian troops. He was given a full military funeral by his enemies, buried with honors. And yet, more than a century later, one question still haunts historians and aviation experts alike. Who really killed him? The official story is neat, if uncertain. On the morning of April 21st, Richthofen was pursuing a Canadian Sopwith Camel pilot, Wilfred Wop May, flying low over enemy territory. What followed was a chaotic dogfight involving multiple aircraft from the Royal Air Force and the Australian Flying Corps. Captain Arthur Roy Brown, May's flight leader, dove into the fray and fired a burst in the Red Baron's direction. The German ace's plane wobbled, then descended gradually into a field and crashed. He was found dead inside, shot through the chest. Initially, Brown was credited with the kill. A victory over the Red Baron was no small feat, and in wartime, stories are often tidied up for morale. But there was a problem. The angle of the fatal bullet didn't match the trajectory from Brown's position in the sky. The shot that ended Richthofen's life came from below, fired from the ground and likely from the right side. That detail opened the floodgates of speculation. Several Australian machine gunners stationed near the location of the crash claimed to have fired on the triplane as it flew low overhead. Most notably, Sergeant Cedric Popkin, operating a Vickers machine gun, was positioned in such a way that he could have fired the fatal shot as Richthofen passed in front of him. Ballistic analysis would later support this theory. The bullet entered through the right side of the chest and exited through the left. It was a single shot, striking at a downward angle, consistent with a ground-based shooter. And Richthofen's plane, according to reports, showed no major damage aside from that wound. He was flying with perfect control until the very last moment. Still, official recognition remained with Brown for years. Perhaps it was simpler that way. Perhaps political convenience outweighed forensic truth. But the mystery doesn't end there. Why, many have asked, was Richthofen flying so recklessly that day? Why was one of the most disciplined pilots of the war pursuing an enemy aircraft deep into hostile territory, ignoring years of training and his own cautious instincts? By 1918, Richthofen was not the same man he had been earlier in the war. He had been wounded the previous year, shot in the head during a mission, and some medical experts have speculated that the injury left lasting effects on his judgment. Post-concussion symptoms, such as impaired decision-making and tunnel vision, could explain his unusual behavior. But others suggest something deeper. Some eyewitnesses reported that the Red Baron appeared confused in the moments before his death, as if disoriented or unaware of his surroundings. Could he have suffered from a momentary lapse, a blackout, or even a stroke? Or was something else at play? Something psychological? He had written just weeks before of feeling weary, haunted by the war. He described an emptiness, what today might be called battle fatigue or trauma. Could this have influenced his final mission? Did he, perhaps, no longer care whether he lived or died? And then, as with all enduring mysteries, the speculative theories begin to take hold. Some fringe researchers have claimed that the Red Baron's death was no accident of war, but a deliberate assassination by his own side. By 1918, morale was collapsing. The German military was desperate. Richthofen had become not just a pilot, but a symbol of a war that was turning irrevocably against them. Could someone have orchestrated his end to preserve his myth, to ensure he never lived to witness defeat? There is no solid evidence to support this idea, but the strange calm with which Richthofen flew into danger that day, the calculated silence with which he died, continues to invite questions. And there is still one more curiosity. Eyewitnesses who examined the crashed aircraft reported that the Red Baron's face was serene. No sign of pain, no fear, just stillness. One soldier later remarked that it looked as though he had landed and fallen asleep. The world lost a pilot that day, but it gained a mystery. Who really fired the shot? Why did a seasoned ace abandon his training? What unseen forces, psychological, medical, or perhaps something else, guided his final flight? As the wind moves through the grass of the Somme, where poppies bloom in silent memory, the crimson shadow of the Red Baron still lingers, not just as a man, not just as a legend, but as a question, one that remains, even now, unanswered. Just inland from the shores of Suvla Bay, on the Gallipoli Peninsula, the land rises in a series of dry, jagged ridges. The August sun beats down mercilessly on the rocky soil. There are no trees to offer shade, only low scrub and thorny bushes stretching across a lifeless landscape. Today, it is quiet, but in the summer of 1915, this was a place of noise and fire, a theater of desperation where British and Allied forces struggled to gain ground against a determined Ottoman defense. And somewhere amid these scorched hills, the 5th Battalion of the Norfolk Regiment, 267 men, walked into the haze of war, and were never seen again. The date was August 12th. The British offensive had reached a critical stage. Troops were ordered to advance inland from Suvla Bay and take the high ground near the village of Anafarta. Among them were the 1/5 Norfolks, a unit composed largely of men from the estates of King George V in Sandringham, farmhands, gamekeepers, clerks, all volunteers, many with close ties to one another. They were well trained and determined. As the assault began, they pushed forward into a dry gully, later identified as Kavak Dere, under heavy fire. According to the official reports, they advanced with courage and precision. Some accounts even describe them outpacing the units on their flanks, pressing deeper into enemy territory. And then, they disappeared. No survivors returned. No bodies were recovered. No trace of the battalion's equipment, wounded or dead, was found in the days that followed. Only silence. Confusion turned to alarm, and alarm to myth. In the absence of clear answers, stories began to emerge. Whispers from nearby units passed quietly through ranks and into letters home. One of the most persistent accounts came decades later, in 1965, from veterans of the New Zealand Field Artillery. They described seeing a peculiar cloud, low-lying and luminous, that hovered directly in the Norfolk's path. The soldiers marched into it, they claimed, and simply vanished. The cloud then lifted and drifted away, leaving nothing behind. Could it be true? At first glance, the story sounds impossible, but it has proven strangely resilient. The witnesses describe the cloud as unnatural, not smoke, not fog, but something self-contained, almost solid in its shape and behavior. They watched it for several minutes. They swore, years later and under oath, that the men were never seen again. Official records tried to offer answers. In 1918, after the Ottoman Empire surrendered, British investigators searched the area and found the bodies of some 180 men, many wearing the insignia of the 5th Norfolks. They lay scattered in a ravine, not far from where the battalion was last seen. But the mystery remained. Only a portion of the unit was accounted for, and many of the bodies showed no signs of having been buried, as if abandoned. What happened to the rest? And why did the Turkish forces report no large-scale engagement in that specific area on that specific day? Some historians suggest a more mundane explanation, that the Norfolks had advanced too far, became isolated, and were cut down in small groups over several days, beyond the view of their comrades and in terrain that made recovery nearly impossible. It's plausible. The chaos of battle often makes clear narratives difficult to establish. Lines blur, orders are lost, and men vanish. But others point to inconsistencies. Why were no prisoners taken? Why did none of the Norfolk's Turkish adversaries record the confrontation in their war diaries? And what of the strange fog or cloud that appears in several independent accounts? There are those who entertain more speculative ideas. Some propose that the cloud was a natural phenomenon, an extremely rare formation of ground fog known as a temperature inversion, which could distort visibility and sound. Under such conditions, soldiers might become disoriented, separate from their lines, and fall silently in unseen combat. Others push further into the realm of the unexplained. Could the event be an example of a time slip, a moment where the boundaries of time and space weakened under the extreme conditions of war? There are stories, though largely anecdotal, of soldiers glimpsing things that do not belong, hearing voices from nowhere, or feeling as if time itself had slowed or changed. Could the disappearance of the Norfolks have been one of these rare, inexplicable moments? Still more fringe theories suggest the involvement of unknown technology, advanced weapons, or sensory manipulation. These ideas, while lacking evidence, reflect a lingering uncertainty, the sense that something unusual happened on that ridge, something that conventional history hasn't fully explained. And then there is the psychological dimension. Many of the men in the 5th Norfolks came from the same small communities. They knew each other, had worked and lived together before the war. Did this tight-knit bond drive them to overextend themselves in battle, refusing to retreat? Could loyalty have led them into an impossible position, out of sight and eventually out of memory? In the end, it is the silence that remains most haunting. In war, disappearance is not uncommon. But to vanish completely, without witnesses, without trace, without even the sound of final gunfire, is something else entirely. As the heat rises over the broken hills of Gallipoli, where dust clings to the stones and the cries of 1915 have long since faded, one cannot help but wonder, what happened to the 5th Norfolks? Were they lost to battle, swallowed by the land, or by something stranger still? The truth may still lie buried somewhere beneath that rugged soil, or it may lie just beyond the reach of time, like a footprint in dust, erased before it could be seen. The North Atlantic Ocean can be both hauntingly beautiful and deeply unforgiving. On a calm day, the horizon stretches endlessly, sky folding into sea in an illusion of quiet harmony, but beneath those glimmering waves lies a realm of darkness, cold, silent, and hidden from human eyes. It was into this mysterious world that a German submarine known as U-28 vanished without warning and without trace. The SM U-28, a Type U-27 class U-boat of the Imperial German Navy, was launched in 1913 and quickly became one of the more successful submarines in the early years of World War I. Under the command of Freiherr Georg Gunther von Forstner, U-28 took part in multiple missions, disrupting Allied shipping lines with lethal efficiency. It was credited with sinking more than 40 vessels during its active service, mostly by torpedo or gunfire. But its end, if we can call it that, remains a mystery, one shadowed not just by uncertainty, but by an account so strange that even seasoned naval historians hesitate to categorize it. On September 2, 1917, U-28 was reportedly operating near the Arctic Circle, somewhere off the coast of Norway. Its mission, to intercept enemy shipping routes in the North Atlantic. The records suggest that the submarine was never heard from again. No distress call, no debris field, no survivors, just silence. In the chaos of wartime, many vessels disappeared. Mines, depth charges, accidents, all too common causes in the perilous underwater theaters of WW1. But U-28 was no ordinary disappearance. The seeds of mystery were planted 2 years earlier, in July 1915, during a seemingly routine attack in the North Sea. According to a post-war account by Commander von Forstner himself, U-28 had just torpedoed the British steamer Iberian. a cargo ship suspected of transporting military supplies. The impact was swift, and the Iberian began to sink bow first. The crew of the U-boat remained on the surface, observing the wreck as it slipped beneath the waves. But then, something unexpected happened. As the Iberian descended, a violent underwater explosion occurred, strong enough to damage U-28's own hull and cause it to surface suddenly. And in that brief moment, something else burst from the water. Von Forstner later described it in extraordinary terms. He claimed that a massive reptilian creature, approximately 60 feet in length with crocodile-like features, was thrown into the air by the force of the explosion. It thrashed wildly before vanishing into the ocean. The sighting, he said, lasted only seconds, but was witnessed by multiple crew members. Could it have been debris? An optical illusion? A figment of trauma-induced imagination? Perhaps. But the strange event remained fixed in the records, unexplained, unverified, and difficult to ignore. Then, 2 years later, U-28 disappeared. No official cause of loss has ever been established. Some suggest it struck a British mine and sank instantly. Others suspect it was destroyed by its own torpedo in a catastrophic misfire, though this would likely have left debris or oil slicks detectable by Allied patrols. But none were found. Not then, not in the years since. And so, speculation took root. Some maritime researchers have revisited von Forstner's bizarre report in light of the submarine's disappearance. Could the creature he described have been real? Could U-28 have encountered it again, or something similar? It's a fringe idea, but not entirely unprecedented. Sailors for centuries have told tales of sea serpents, krakens, and other denizens of the deep. While most such stories are chalked up to exaggeration or misidentification, they persist, reappearing again and again in different parts of the world in different forms. Skeptics, of course, argue that von Forstner's account was likely colored by post-war embellishment, perhaps intended to add drama to an already dangerous tale. Others note that decompression effects and the trauma of war can lead to shared hallucinations, especially when viewing chaotic scenes at sea. But what if the truth lies somewhere between myth and reality? It's not impossible that the Iberian's sinking could have disturbed a deep-dwelling marine animal, unknown to science, which briefly surfaced before disappearing again. Even today, vast portions of the ocean remain unexplored. New species, some large, some ancient, are still discovered in the darkest depths. Could von Forstner's crew have seen something science hasn't yet acknowledged? Still, none of this explains U-28's final mission. Did the submarine encounter another such anomaly? Was it destroyed by forces unknown, not mechanical but natural or even biological? Then again, perhaps the explanation is more mundane, but no less eerie. Submarines of that era were notoriously fragile. A mechanical failure, a design flaw, or simple human error could have caused a sudden implosion. Such an event, deep below the surface, would leave little to no trace. In that vast, cold emptiness, the ocean rarely gives back its dead. The mystery of U-28's disappearance remains one of World War I's most curious naval enigmas. A vessel with a formidable record, lost without a word, tied forever to a strange tale of something monstrous in the depths. What did the crew of U-28 see that day in 1915? Did it haunt them in their final moments? Or was the true cause of their disappearance something even more bizarre, something beyond current understanding? The ocean keeps its secrets well, and somewhere, in the cold waters north of Norway, U-28 may still rest, silent and unseen, waiting to be found, or perhaps never meant to be. In the cool, mist-draped highlands of Scotland, time often feels suspended. Rolling hills unfurl like waves of stone and grass, cloaked in heather and low-hanging fog. Quiet lochs reflect the moody skies above, and small villages dot the landscape, unchanged, it seems, for centuries. But during the early years of the First World War, this serene land became the unlikely setting for one of the most curious and persistent wartime legends, the appearance of a phantom army, said to be Russian. It began, as so many mysteries do, with whispers. In the late summer and early autumn of 1914, strange reports began to circulate across Britain. Railway workers, station masters, and residents in remote Scottish towns spoke of long trains moving silently at night, packed with soldiers. But these were not British troops. According to witnesses, the men were pale, silent, and dressed in thick coats, some with fur-lined collars. Their beards were heavy, their eyes weary, and they spoke a language no one nearby understood. Russian, some said, and not just a few. The rumor quickly escalated. Entire divisions, thousands of Russian soldiers, were allegedly being transported through Scotland, headed south by rail. Some claimed they saw snow still clinging to their boots, as if they had only just arrived from the Eastern Front. Others said the trains traveled only at night, the soldiers wrapped in silence, their presence unannounced, unexplained. At first, it sounded like hearsay, but the story spread. In Liverpool, people claimed to see them marching onto ships. In Yorkshire, there were reports of columns of men moving under cover of fog. Local newspapers began to mention the possibility, if cautiously. And in London, the rumor took on new life, that the Russian army, perhaps as many as 100,000 men, had landed in Scotland to reinforce Britain's Western Front against the Germans. It was an idea both bizarre and comforting. Bizarre because it defied logistics. How could so many troops arrive unseen in a country not directly linked by land to Russia? And comforting because, at that time, Britain's forces were badly outnumbered, and the war was turning grim. The notion that a massive Russian force had secretly crossed the North Sea to join the fight was a powerful morale booster. But was there any truth to it? The British War Office never confirmed the arrival of Russian troops in Scotland. No official record of such a deployment exists. In fact, the Russian military was deeply entangled in its own battles on the Eastern Front and lacked both the naval logistics and political coordination necessary for such a maneuver. And yet, the rumors persisted. Why? Some historians believe it was part of a deliberate propaganda campaign, an early psychological operation designed to boost morale and unsettle the Germans. Indeed, intercepted German communications from the time reveal that the Kaiser's intelligence services were alarmed by rumors of Russian troops moving through Britain. The strategy may have worked. German forces reportedly held back reinforcements on the Western Front, fearing a sudden influx of Russian soldiers. If so, the Ghost Army of Scotland may have been a phantom by design, fabricated not by villagers or train conductors, but by generals and ministers. Others argue that the rumor spread organically, born from the human need to believe in help just beyond the horizon. In times of fear, people often grasp for hope in the shape of the unknown. A lone train at night, glimpsed from afar, becomes a convoy. A stranger in a foreign uniform becomes an ally. Memory bends, facts blur, and soon a story is born. But that doesn't explain everything. There are too many accounts, too many specific details that emerge from scattered, unrelated sources. Railway workers in Perth claimed to have loaded crates marked with Cyrillic lettering. A woman in Inverness swore she saw soldiers with fur hats disembark and quietly board another train, their eyes never meeting hers. A fisherman along the Moray coast said he saw a transport ship land at night, its deck crowded with tall, silent figures. Could some Russian soldiers have arrived in Britain secretly? Perhaps advisors, specialists, or volunteers? It's not impossible, but there's no firm evidence. Some suggest they may have been Polish or even Siberian laborers brought in under disguise, but the theory remains speculative. And then there is the most curious element of all. In many versions of the story, the Russian soldiers are described as oddly distant, as if not entirely present. Silent, pale, otherworldly. Some were said to march with unnatural precision. Others moved through the mists without a sound. Their boots, their breath, their expressions, each detail colored with a strange sense of unreality. Was it just imagination, a trick of moonlight and stress? Or were the people of Scotland witnessing something they couldn't quite explain? Could this have been a shared hallucination? A cultural mirage shaped by fear and hope, shadow and fog? Or was someone, really there? Even today, the legend of the phantom Russian army survives in Scottish lore. It is rarely spoken of in textbooks, but it lingers in local stories, wartime memoirs, and the fading margins of old newspapers. And still, the question remains: did thousands of Russian soldiers cross Britain in secret, unseen, and unrecorded? Or was the entire episode a ghost story born from the fever of war? As the Highland fog rolls once more across the tracks where trains no longer run, the truth lies buried in time, quiet, obscured, and unresolved. Beyond the high hedgerows and stone-paved roads of Doorn, a quiet Dutch village nestled in the heart of Utrecht, stands Huisdoorn, a stately manor surrounded by meticulously trimmed gardens and tall oaks. It is peaceful now, distant from the sounds of battle and politics. But during the years following World War I, this house held within it the weight of a fallen empire, and if rumors are to be believed, a secret lost to time, the personal diary of Kaiser Wilhelm II. The final German emperor, once at the center of Europe's greatest conflict, lived out his exile in this tranquil Dutch estate, far from the ruins of Berlin and the shattered trenches of the Western Front. After abdicating the throne in November 1918, Wilhelm crossed the border into neutral Netherlands, where he was granted asylum, and where, for over 2 decades until his death in 1941, he remained a figure both isolated and enigmatic. Among the few certainties of Wilhelm's exile is that he never stopped writing. Letters, memoirs, reflections. He filled hundreds of pages during his years at Huisdoorn. Some of these documents were published or archived, offering a filtered glimpse into the mind of a man who once commanded an empire. But others were never found. Among historians, one story has persisted with stubborn quietness: that Wilhelm kept a private diary, distinct from his official memoirs, recorded in a series of leather-bound notebooks, and that within those pages were thoughts too candid, too controversial, or too damning to ever see the light of day. Is this merely speculation, or did such a diary truly exist? The first whispers emerged not long after Wilhelm's death. Dutch officials who had interacted with the household claimed that certain possessions, including several journals, had been removed under mysterious circumstances. A former servant, interviewed in the 1950s, recalled crates being packed in haste just weeks before the Nazi invasion of the Netherlands in 1940. Some of these containers, she said, were marked with the imperial seal, but their contents were never recovered after the war. More curiously, British intelligence reports declassified decades later mention intercepted communications, suggesting that Wilhelm's writings were of strategic interest to both Allied and Axis governments. Why? What could be so valuable in the musings of a deposed monarch? Some believe the answer lies in what Wilhelm may have recorded about the origins of World War I. For over a century, the question of how the war began, who pushed first, who hesitated, who allowed it to unfold, has been debated relentlessly. While the Treaty of Versailles placed sole blame on Germany, Many scholars now agree that the truth is more complex. Did Wilhelm write, in private, about secret meetings, pressures from generals, or diplomatic failures that never made it into the public record? Could his diary contain evidence that contradicts the established narrative? Others go further. Several fringe researchers suggest that Wilhelm was aware of covert dealings, backroom agreements with financiers, aristocrats, and foreign powers, that shaped the war's trajectory. Some of these theories veer into speculation about early intelligence networks and secret societies operating behind national governments. These ideas remain controversial and largely unsubstantiated, but they continue to feed the mystery. Then there is the question of the diary's fate. One theory holds that the journal was destroyed, burned by loyal aides who feared its contents would be used against the Hohenzollern family or the German nation. Another suggests it was smuggled out of the country during the early stages of World War II, possibly to Switzerland or Sweden, hidden among diplomatic luggage or art collections. A more dramatic version claims the diary was seized by the Nazis themselves. Wilhelm, despite his royal status, had a complicated relationship with Hitler. While the former Kaiser was at times flattered by gestures of respect from the new regime, he never fully embraced the ideology of the Third Reich. It's conceivable that his writings contained criticisms, warnings even, that the Nazis would have found deeply inconvenient. If they discovered the diary, would they have destroyed it or hidden it? Some suggest it may now lie in a forgotten archive in Berlin, misfiled, mislabeled, or simply waiting. And what if it were to be found? Would it change our understanding of the war? Would it humanize a figure long cast as a caricature of imperial arrogance, or further implicate him in the tragedy that followed? There's an intimacy to diaries that history books cannot replicate. They capture what official records cannot: uncertainty, contradiction, regret. If Wilhelm truly poured his thoughts into secret pages, they could offer a rare, unfiltered window into one of the most pivotal figures of the early 20th century. But that window remains closed. Even Hoosdorn, now a museum, offers no clues. Visitors walk its corridors and admire the imperial memorabilia. But the personal spaces, the hidden drawers, the locked chests, yield nothing. Perhaps the diary never existed. Perhaps it was simply imagined by those who needed to believe that somewhere the truth was being written down. Or perhaps it waits, somewhere still, in an attic, a vault, a forgotten shelf, leather-bound, dust-covered, silent. What would we read if we could turn its pages? And how much of the past might suddenly look different? The Black Forest in southern Germany is a land shaped by shadow and silence. Dense pine trees stretch across rolling hills, cloaking the ground in perpetual twilight. Ancient villages lie nestled in its valleys, their rooftops often hidden by mist. It's a landscape rich with legend, of witches, wolves, and wandering spirits. But among the more recent whispers is one tale that still captures imaginations and stirs the hearts of treasure hunters: the mystery of the lost gold of the German Empire. At the end of the First World War, the German Reich was collapsing. Its armies were retreating, its monarchy had crumbled, and revolution spread across the streets of Berlin. Amid this upheaval, a question emerged, quietly at first, but with growing urgency. What happened to the empire's gold reserves? Before the war, the German treasury had held vast amounts of gold bullion, coins, and foreign currency. As with many imperial powers, its wealth was stored in part to back its paper currency and support military expenditures. Estimates vary, but by the start of the war in 1914, Germany's central bank, the Reichsbank, controlled between 2,000 and 3,000 metric tons of gold, valued today in the tens of billions of dollars. Yet by 1918, as the war ended in a haze of defeat and political chaos, large portions of that reserve had vanished. Some of it, of course, had been spent, used to finance the war effort, purchase arms, pay soldiers, and stabilize the economy. But even generous accounting cannot explain the full disappearance. A significant amount, hundreds of tons according to some calculations, simply dropped out of official records. So where did it go? The first theories emerged in the early 1920s as auditors and Allied investigators tried to piece together the Reich's finances in the wake of the Treaty of Versailles. Hidden bank accounts, secret shipments, and forged manifests were all suspected. Some believed the gold had been smuggled out of the country in the final days of the war, spirited away by loyalists to prevent it from falling into enemy hands. One story focuses on a convoy that allegedly left Berlin in November 1918, bound for the south. Its destination, the Bavarian Alps, or perhaps the edge of the Black Forest. According to this theory, the gold, packed into crates marked as machinery, was moved by train, then by horse-drawn wagons, and finally buried in a remote mountain cavern. It was meant to be recovered by a future loyalist government. But that day never came. No official records of such a transport exist. Yet in the post-war years, locals from towns near Freiburg and Baden-Baden reported strange military movements in the forests. Columns of men who weren't part of the defeated army, traveling by night and avoiding populated areas. Others spoke of temporary camps hidden in valleys, guarded and then abandoned without trace. Could these accounts be fragments of truth? Or just stories shaped by uncertainty? Some historians have traced connections between missing Reichsbank documents and members of the German High Command who fled the country in 1919 and 1920. A handful were later linked to offshore accounts in Switzerland and Argentina, accounts that received large unexplained transfers in gold-backed currency. Did they act alone? Or were they part of a coordinated effort to conceal the empire's final assets? There is another theory, more speculative but no less persistent. Some researchers believe that the gold was entrusted to the Prussian aristocracy, hidden in estates and castles, their stone walls serving as natural vaults. During the war, several noble families had close ties to the Kaiser and the military elite. It's said that agreements were made in secret, that if the empire fell, its wealth would be kept safe until it could rise again. After 1918, many of these families fell silent or faded into obscurity. Their lands were seized, their titles stripped. But a few retained private holdings, passed down quietly through generations. Could the gold still be there? Behind cellar walls or beneath manicured gardens? Then there's the tale of the Württemberg Cave. In 1945, toward the end of the Second World War, Allied forces found sealed crates deep in a mine near the town of Merkers, containing Nazi gold and artwork looted from across Europe. The discovery confirmed that Germany had indeed used underground storage for precious assets. What intrigued some historians, however, was a minor detail in one of the military reports. A single crate bore markings from the Reichsbank, dated 1917. Had some of the First World War gold survived, passed from one regime to the next? Or was this simply a coincidence, a reused container from a different era? More recently, amateur treasure hunters have searched lakes and woods across southern Germany with metal detectors and sonar. In 1995, a group excavating near Lake Titisee claimed to find evidence of buried crates, though none were recovered before authorities halted the dig. Local officials denied any knowledge of imperial treasure, but rumors flared once more. Some believe the gold may never be found because it was never buried, not in soil or stone, but hidden in plain sight, melted down, recast, and laundered into the global economy through secret post-war transactions. In this view, the lost treasure is not lost at all. It simply wears a different face. But others aren't convinced. They point to unexplained gaps in German financial records, persistent rumors of royal archives gone missing, and accounts from soldiers and civilians who spoke of heavy, guarded shipments moving through quiet countryside roads as the empire breathed its last. Could the lost gold of the German Empire still lie buried beneath the forests and fields of the Old Reich? Or has it already slipped through history's fingers, claimed by time, deception, or silence? Somewhere, perhaps beneath moss-covered stones or in the forgotten vaults of nobility, the truth may still rest, waiting to be uncovered, or left undisturbed. Vimy Ridge rises gently from the plains of northern France, its slopes lined with whispering poplars and memorial crosses weathered by a century of wind. Today, it is a place of reverence, a Canadian national monument standing solemn and white against the gray skies. But beneath the rolling fields and carefully maintained pathways lies another world entirely. A world that, even now, remains only partially understood. It is a world of tunnels, twisting, echoing, and silent. In the years leading up to the Battle of Vimy Ridge in April 1917, Canadian and British engineers embarked on a massive, secretive effort. The creation of an underground labyrinth designed to bring thousands of soldiers safely beneath no man's land. More than 12 kilometers of tunnels were dug beneath the ridge, some wide enough to carry stretchers, others reinforced with concrete and wood, complete with electric lights, water pumps, and even communication lines. Dug in complete secrecy, this subterranean network was key to Canada's stunning victory in one of World War I's most strategically important battles. Many of these tunnels were carefully documented. Some, like the Grange and Goodman tunnels, have been preserved or rediscovered. But others appear only in fragmentary records, mentioned in hastily scrawled maps, in whispered reports between officers, or in post-war testimonies from veterans who described paths that seem not to exist today. What happened to those tunnels? Are they simply lost to time, caved in and forgotten? Or is there something more concealed beneath the chalky soil of Vimy? One of the enduring mysteries centers on reports from engineers who described a tunnel known only as Gallery 14. It was said to run deeper than the rest, burrowing well beneath the water table, an unusual and dangerous undertaking for the time. Its construction reportedly required special equipment and took far longer than any of the others. But curiously, no detailed plans of Gallery 14 have ever been recovered. No clear coordinates, no elevation data, only a few cryptic entries in war diaries, mentions of a deep shaft, of reinforced descent, and of orders classified beyond field command. Why the secrecy? Some believe Gallery 14 was intended to store munitions or serve as a backup command post, its depth a safeguard against enemy shelling. Others think it may have been a test site where British and Canadian engineers experimented with new types of underground warfare, including rudimentary gas dispersion systems or listening chambers designed to detect enemy digging. But then there are stories that don't quite fit into the standard military narrative. In 1982, a group of French researchers surveying an old sector of the ridge using ground-penetrating radar detected what appeared to be a void, long and narrow, at a depth of approximately 40 meters, far deeper than known tunnels in the area. Efforts to investigate further were halted due to unstable terrain. No excavation was approved. To this day, the anomaly remains unexplained. A year later, a Canadian veteran named Arthur McKinnon, who served with the 3rd Canadian Tunneling Company, shared a peculiar recollection during a taped interview. He spoke of a shaft that went too far down and a team of engineers who came back up, different. He didn't elaborate, only that after that day the tunnel was sealed and access was restricted. Could these have been the confused memories of an aging man? Perhaps. But McKinnon was not the only one. At least 2 other veterans mentioned a similar shaft during oral history projects in the 1990s. Both described a tunnel that seemed colder than the others, lined with a kind of gray stone not native to the region, and leading to chambers that weren't on the maps. And then there's the matter of the symbols. In one section of the preserved Goodman Tunnel, a faded inscription appears carved into the wall, a series of geometric shapes, and a circle surrounded by rays. Historians typically dismiss it as battlefield graffiti, but some researchers have pointed out that it bears a striking resemblance to arcane marks used in 19th century European mysticism, sigils drawn to protect or seal spaces. Coincidence? Or was something placed there that soldiers feared? Other fringe theories go further still. They suggest that the depths beneath Vimy Ridge may contain more than forgotten war tunnels, that the ridge, known for its unusual geology and deep chalk veins, was a site of ancient significance long before the war. Some claim Roman or even pre-Roman peoples once mined the area, and that 20th century tunneling may have broken into long-forgotten chambers. Of course, no solid archaeological evidence has confirmed this. Yet it is curious how often soldiers described feelings of unease in certain tunnels, sudden temperature drops, strange acoustics, or a sense of being watched. These experiences, while anecdotal, appear in multiple letters and interviews. Are these simply echoes of trauma? Symptoms of extreme stress and fear in confined spaces? Almost certainly, at least in part. But the patterns remain persistent. Today, only a portion of Vimy's tunnels are accessible to the public. Many remain sealed for safety, their entrances lost or covered by earth and time. The Canadian government, in cooperation with French authorities, maintains strict controls over excavation, both to preserve the battlefield and to honor the thousands who died there. Yet questions linger. What happened to the records of Gallery 14? Why do certain sectors of the ridge still appear on military maps, but not on geological surveys? What lies in the radar anomaly buried deep beneath the limestone? And if there were chambers that predated the war, opened again by the miners of 1917, what, if anything, did they contain? Vimy Ridge is remembered as a place of courage, of sacrifice, and of national identity. But beneath its roots, beneath the poppies and the silence, the earth may still hold secrets that have yet to be uncovered, or perhaps never should be. Even today, the fields of the Somme are quiet, almost too quiet. Rolling green pastures stretch across northern France, dotted with weathered memorials and white headstones that bear the names, and sometimes only the initials, of men lost more than a century ago. Trees line the horizon, their trunks still twisted by old shell fire, and in the stillness of the early morning mist, the land feels watchful. Beneath this peaceful surface lie remnants of a very different time. Dug deep into the earth are the scars of one of the deadliest battles in human history, the Battle of the Somme. Between July and November 1916, over 1 million men were killed or wounded along this 15-mile front. The air then was not still. It was thick with smoke, blood, screams, and thunder. The trenches, once bustling arteries of war, now crumble beneath moss and mud. But some say they still echo with something more. Strange lights, distant voices, apparitions seen by visitors, soldiers, even researchers. Whispers of something left behind. Reports of paranormal activity along the Somme date back not long after the guns fell silent. French farmers returning to reclaim their land in 1919 spoke of shadows flitting through the fog, of spectral figures glimpsed at the edges of ruined trenches. Some described hearing the crack of phantom rifle fire on windless nights. Others claimed their horses refused to cross certain fields, no matter how hard they were driven. One of the earliest and most famous accounts came from a British officer who returned to the region in the 1920s, hoping to visit the graves of his fallen comrades. In a letter preserved in a private collection, he described standing alone near a section of preserved trench when he felt a sudden drop in temperature. He claimed he heard boots squelching through mud behind him. When he turned, there was no one there, only the marks of fresh prints slowly filling with rain. Could this be the imagination of a grieving veteran? A man haunted by memory more than ghosts? Perhaps, but similar experiences began to emerge across decades. In the 1970s, a team of French archaeologists excavating a trench near Beaumont-Hamel reported hearing voices, low, unintelligible murmurs, as they worked underground. At first, they dismissed it as radio interference, but when they returned the following day, they found their equipment dead and several items mysteriously displaced. One member of the team refused to return, citing a persistent sense of being watched from the soil itself. Still, skeptics suggest more plausible explanations. The land around the Somme is riddled with iron, munitions, and shifting groundwater. These factors can create infrasound, low-frequency vibrations known to cause discomfort, dizziness, and even hallucinations. The mist and uneven lighting of the terrain can produce optical illusions. Our brains, finely tuned to recognize human forms, sometimes create patterns out of shadows. But not all sightings are so easily dismissed. In 1992, a group of Canadian military historians conducting field research near Thiepval claimed to witness a peculiar phenomenon. As dusk approached, one member spotted what looked like a line of men, perhaps 30, moving silently across a ridge once held by German forces. They were too far away to identify clearly, but their uniforms seemed anachronistic. When the group moved to get a closer look, the figures had vanished. No vehicles had passed, and no reenactments were scheduled. Photographs taken moments later revealed nothing. Could these have been local reenactors or passers-by misidentified in low light? Possibly, but the historians insisted the figures were moving with purpose, in file, in silence, and then simply gone. Others speak not of sightings, but of feelings. Visitors, especially those unfamiliar with military history, often describe a sense of disorientation near the old front lines, a sudden heaviness, the urge to turn back. Some have collapsed without explanation. Local guides tell stories of cameras failing, batteries draining, or GPS devices malfunctioning when brought into certain sections of trench or crater. One area near the Lochneger crater, an enormous scar left by a mine explosion on the first day of the battle, is particularly prone to such accounts. Tourists there have reported hearing the faint rhythm of marching boots or the far-off cry of whistles, though the fields appear deserted. Photographs taken at dusk sometimes return with odd blurs or streaks of light, shapes that defy easy explanation. Are these the imprints of memory? The land refusing to forget? Or is something more active at work? More speculative theories suggest that mass trauma, especially when concentrated in a single place, can leave behind energy or echoes. These ideas fall outside mainstream science, but are part of a growing field of parapsychology. Could the Somme, saturated with pain and death, be a kind of recording ground? A place where moments play back, over and over, to those willing, or unlucky enough, to sense them. Veterans, too, were not immune to these beliefs. Letters and memoirs of former soldiers sometimes include references to the ghosts of the line, or the watchers in the fog. They rarely speak in dramatic terms, more often in hushed, careful language, as if discussing something sacred. Not all believed in ghosts, but many believed in something. Today, the trenches of the Somme are tourist destinations. School groups walk through the same paths where men once crawled and died. But even now, visitors pause, mid-step, feeling something they can't quite describe. A shift in the air, a distant voice on the wind. Could it all be explained by science, psychology, and the eerie weight of history? Maybe. Or maybe the Somme, like so many battlefields, holds on to its memories more fiercely than we realize. Perhaps the dead are not restless, but the land itself is. And in the silence between heartbeats, between footsteps, something watches still. Not far from Ypres, in the scarred landscape of Flanders, the land still bears quiet reminders of unspeakable cruelty. Here, trenches once sliced across the earth like open wounds, and forests, now regrown, once stood as shattered stumps under endless shell fire. In this once bleeding corner of Belgium, among the fields that bore witness to the first mass use of chemical weapons and the desperate charges of thousands, a single, haunting story emerged. One unlike any other from the war, the alleged crucifixion of a Canadian soldier. It is a tale that chills even the most seasoned historians, not simply because of its brutality, but because, over a century later, its truth remains cloaked in fog. The first accounts came in April 1915, following the Second Battle of Ypres. Canadian troops, hastily deployed to reinforce the line after a deadly German gas attack, were thrown into chaos. In the days that followed, as the front shifted violently and communications faltered, stories began to spread among survivors. A Canadian soldier, captured alive by German forces, had not been taken prisoner in the usual manner. Instead, according to several testimonies, he had been nailed to a barn door, crucified with bayonets through his hands and feet. The image was so horrific, so medieval, that it seemed almost impossible. Yet multiple soldiers claimed to have seen the aftermath. One officer reported that men from the 48th Highlanders had discovered the body outside a ruined farmhouse near St. Julien. Others claimed to have seen the soldier still alive, pinned and left to die in agony. A letter from a lieutenant, later submitted to the Canadian War Records Office, described the scene in grim detail. The body elevated, arms outstretched, a twisted form of mockery in the middle of a war already thick with death. The reports ignited fury. The British press seized on the story, publishing lurid headlines. Politicians denounced the act as proof of German barbarism. The tale spread far and fast, reinforcing the already powerful narrative of the war as a struggle between civilization and savagery. But almost immediately, questions arose. There was no body, no photograph, no confirmed identity, no verifiable name for the victim. And perhaps most importantly, no definitive witness who could be placed at the site of the alleged atrocity with clear, substantiated evidence. The Germans, for their part, denied the accusation completely, dismissing it as propaganda. And indeed, by 1916, British and Canadian military censors had begun discouraging references to the story, perhaps fearing it could not withstand scrutiny. Still, the accounts persisted. After the war, the Canadian government conducted an inquiry. Statements were gathered from veterans who had served at Ypres. Several insisted they had heard the story directly from those who had seen it. One officer even claimed that senior commanders had ordered the body buried quickly to avoid scandal or further distress. The identity of the soldier remained elusive, until 1919, when the name Sergeant Harry Band surfaced. Band, a member of the Central Ontario Regiment, had been listed as missing in action on April 24, 1915. His name appeared in several articles that suggested he may have been the crucified man. His family, desperate for answers, pleaded with the government for more information. But again, no conclusive link could be made. No grave was found. No remains were recovered. The idea that Band had been crucified was compelling, but unconfirmed. Decades later, new theories emerged. Some researchers speculated that the story might have originated as a misunderstood or exaggerated account of a soldier killed and displayed by enemy forces as a warning, perhaps strung up or posed post-mortem. Others suggested it could have been the psychological projection of a traumatized mind, a metaphor that took on a literal life through rumor and repetition. Then there were those who pointed to the use of crucifixion imagery in Allied propaganda. Posters, pamphlets, and films often portrayed German forces as inhuman monsters, crucifying children or attacking churches. Could the tale of the Canadian soldier have been a powerful but invented symbol, meant to galvanize support and justify the horrors of total war? Not everyone agreed. In 2002, British historian Tim Cook published research suggesting that the story, while impossible to fully confirm, should not be dismissed so easily. His work pointed to the sincerity of the original testimonies and the consistency of certain details across multiple independent sources. Could there have been a kernel of truth buried beneath chaos and time? Modern forensic efforts have not brought clarity. The landscape around Ypres has changed significantly. Buildings are gone, roads have shifted. Mass graves and destroyed records make identifying individuals from that time extraordinarily difficult. And yet, the idea endures. Why? Is it because, at its core, the story touches something primal? Something about betrayal, sacrifice, and cruelty that transcends history? Or is it because we instinctively seek symbols, figures to embody the pain and chaos of events too vast to comprehend? Was there a crucified Canadian? Or was there only the echo of one, shaped by grief, trauma, and the desperate need to make meaning from the madness? Today, when visitors walk the preserved battlefields of Ypres, they find rows of graves marked "Known unto God." Among them could be the remains of the soldier in question, or perhaps he lies elsewhere, forever unidentified. The field where it supposedly happened? No longer a barn, no longer marked. Just green grass. Just silence. And still the question lingers. Was this horror real or imagined? A forgotten crime or a shared myth? The land isn't saying. And maybe that's part of the mystery. The North Sea, even on its calmest days, seems to hold secrets just beneath the surface. Its waters are cold, gray, and shifting, an endless expanse where time and memory blur together. Beneath those waves lie the wrecks of ships, the skeletons of war machines, and stories too strange to be fully explained. One of those stories belongs to Zeppelin L-19. A giant of the skies in its time, the L-19 was part of Germany's growing fleet of airships, machines that drifted silently over enemy territory and brought the war to Britain's doorstep. It was nearly 520 feet long, a floating fortress of canvas and gas, driven by 4 engines and manned by a crew of 16. These airships were designed not only for reconnaissance, but for destruction. They were symbols of fear and of ambition. On the night of January 31st, 1916, the L-19 joined a squadron of other Zeppelins on a bombing raid over England. The mission was bold and dangerous. A long flight over the North Sea, past coastal defenses, into the industrial heartlands of the enemy. That night, L-19 dropped explosives on the Midlands, causing panic and fires in several towns. But on the return journey, something went wrong. Somewhere over the sea, the Zeppelin began to falter. British anti-aircraft guns had damaged one or more of its engines. Icy winds battered its frame. Eventually, L-19 lost altitude and was forced to descend into the freezing waters north of the Netherlands. And then, it vanished. But not before something unusual occurred. In the early morning of February 2nd, a British fishing vessel, the King Stephen, came across a strange sight. A crippled Zeppelin floating in the water, deflated but still partially intact, with men clinging to its frame. These men were survivors from L-19. They signaled frantically to the trawler. They were desperate, freezing, likely injured. Captain William Martin of the King Stephen would later report that he made a grim decision. He did not rescue the German crew. His reasons? The King Stephen had no radio. There were 16 enemy soldiers and only 9 aboard his own ship. He feared they would overpower his crew, seize the vessel, and return to Germany with valuable intelligence. So, instead, he left them. Survivors shouted across the water in English, pleading for mercy, but Martin turned away. What happened after that remains uncertain. Several days later, fragments of the Zeppelin structure washed ashore. A few personal items and parts of the gondola were recovered, but the bodies of the crew were never found, nor was the main wreckage of the airship. Official German reports list the L-19 and her crew as lost at sea, but soon, rumors began to swirl. A Dutch fisherman reported seeing an unusual object submerged near the Frisian Islands, larger than a whale, rigid and partially metallic. Naval search efforts were launched, but no wreck was ever confirmed. Some speculated that the Zeppelin might have drifted underwater intact, trapped by air pockets or caught in a deep undersea trench. Others wondered if the crew had somehow survived longer than believed, washed ashore on an isolated island or rescued later in secret by a neutral ship. Then more strange details emerged. In 1917, a bottle washed up near the Danish coast. Inside was a letter, supposedly written by Lieutenant Commander Odo Luva, L-19's first officer. The note, scrawled in pencil, described their abandonment, the cold and the slow fading of hope. "We are still alive," it read, "but freezing and weak. The sea is calm now. Maybe tomorrow a ship will come." The handwriting matched known examples, but the authenticity was never officially verified. Was this a genuine message from a dying man? A posthumous cry for help that came too late? Or a carefully planted piece of propaganda? More radical theories have taken root over time. One claims that the Zeppelin was indeed rescued, secretly, and taken by a Dutch or even British intelligence operation for study. Could the British have salvaged the airship's remains to learn its design secrets, while concealing the fact from the public for wartime advantage? Some researchers note the technological leaps in British airship design that occurred shortly afterward. Coincidence? Or the result of reverse engineering something never officially recovered? Still others believe the L-19's story was manipulated for psychological impact. Captain Martin's refusal to save the Germans drew both criticism and praise. Some called him a coward, others a patriot. But years later, as post-war interviews surfaced, discrepancies appeared in his recollections. Did he perhaps see more than he claimed? Was he ordered to withhold the rescue for reasons beyond safety? It's a mystery that lives in the spaces between truth and fog, between war's necessities and its regrets. No definitive trace of the L-19 has ever been found. Its final resting place remains hidden beneath the currents of the North Sea, if it remains at all. And so, the questions linger. What exactly happened in those final hours? Was L-19 simply another tragic casualty of war? A mechanical failure followed by human fear and unforgiving cold? Or did something more complex, more carefully hidden, unfold beneath the surface of history? As the waves roll endlessly across the North Sea, they erase all footprints. But for a moment, in the icy dawn of 1916, 16 men floated between life and death, within sight of rescue, and then were gone. And perhaps, somewhere below, the skeleton of the L-19 still rests, silent, heavy with secrets, and waiting for a time when the sea might finally give it back. In the northeast of France, where the Meuse River meanders past forgotten farmlands and dense forests, there lies a place caught in the stillness of time. Ornes. There are no shops here, no children playing, no voices echoing through cobbled streets. Just a few ruined walls, quiet pathways overgrown with moss, and a somber sign at the edge of the road, Village détruit. Morts pour la France. Destroyed village. Died for France. But unlike many battle-ravaged places that were later rebuilt, Ornes never came back. And while some nearby lost villages have been preserved as memorials, Ornes remains unusually silent, physically absent from most maps, unpopulated for over a century, and yet never officially erased. Why? What happened here? The official account is stark, but simple. In 1916, during the Battle of Verdun, one of the longest and most brutal engagements of the First World War, Ornes found itself directly in the path of German artillery. Like many villages in the region, it was evacuated, then pulverized by relentless shelling. Its homes collapsed, its church shattered. The land was left so churned and poisoned by war that rebuilding was deemed impossible. Yet, something about Ornes doesn't sit easily with that narrative. The mystery lies not only in its destruction, but in what followed, or rather, what didn't. Unlike neighboring villages such as Bézonvaux or Fleury-devant Douaumont, which are preserved with clear memorial markers, paths, and plaques detailing their histories, Ornes is often left out of formal remembrances. It is officially classified as a village that died for France, and yet it is one of the least documented among them. For decades after the war, no restoration was attempted, no visible memorial center established. Even its ruins seem strangely untouched, as though something or someone meant for it to stay forgotten. Could it be that the damage here was simply too extensive? That no living structure could be safely built atop unstable, shell-pocked ground? Possibly. But there are inconsistencies. French military engineering reports from 1919 described Ornes' soil as heavily disturbed, but not irrecoverable. These assessments noted other villages in worse condition that were nonetheless partially rebuilt. Why then was Ornes left alone? Whispers of something darker began to surface in the 1920s. A few returning soldiers, now elderly and haunted, recalled rumors whispered in the trenches near Ornes. They spoke of a night in March 1916 when communication with an entire forward unit, positioned just outside the village, was suddenly and inexplicably lost. No shelling had been reported in that sector at the time. Patrols sent to investigate found no remains, no weapons, no signs of struggle, just silence. Some believed the unit had deserted, a grave accusation in wartime. Others suspected a sudden German ambush, or that the men had been buried alive by a freak bombardment. But none of these theories could be confirmed. The men were never found. Then there's the tale of the white mist. Several soldiers, both French and German, reportedly described an eerie fog that would descend around Ornes without warning, thicker than normal smoke, almost luminescent in moonlight. They claimed it muffled sound, distorted shapes, and disoriented even experienced scouts. One soldier wrote in his diary, "It swallowed the land whole. You could walk 20 paces into it and vanish from sight. When it lifted, the trees seemed to have moved." Of course, war zones are chaotic. Smoke, gas, and weather combine to create strange visual effects. But the recurring description of this particular mist, its unnatural behavior, its timing, leads some to wonder, was Ornes caught in something more than just artillery fire? In 1953, a group of amateur historians sought permission to excavate parts of the village site. Their goal was to study foundation remnants and retrieve artifacts from beneath the soil. According to unofficial accounts, they were denied access at the last minute. The stated reason? Soil instability. Yet archival records show that similar sites nearby, with identical geological profiles, had been cleared for limited excavation. Why was Ornes treated differently? In the years since, some fringe theories have emerged. One suggests that Ornes may have sat atop a pre-Christian burial ground or sacred site, its destruction in the Great War merely the latest chapter in a long, haunted history. Another theory, favored by esoteric researchers, posits that the area was the site of experimental munitions testing, possibly chemical or biological in nature, and was deliberately sealed off afterward to avoid scandal. None of these claims are supported by concrete evidence, but they persist, whispered on forums, written in obscure journals, discussed quietly among military history circles. The most curious part? Even now, Ornes is technically still a commune. It has a mayor appointed by the French government, but no citizens, no post office, no population to govern. It is an official municipality with no one to call it home. Its church bell has not rung in over 100 years. And while nearby destroyed villages have small chapels, interpretive signs, and even guided tours, Ornes remains harder to access. The road leading to it is narrow, unmarked in places. Visitors describe a strange quiet there, a kind of heaviness that's difficult to explain. Of course, all of this could be chalked up to coincidence, neglect, the quiet fade of history into the soil. But still, why was Ornes singled out? Was it simply a victim of war, or is there more beneath the earth than rubble? What happened to the missing soldiers? Was the mist real, or the product of stress and terror? Why do so few mention Ornes today, even among scholars of Verdun? The forest continues to reclaim the village, tree by tree, year by year. But in that silence, beneath layers of earth, beneath memory, something lingers, and perhaps, just perhaps, Ornes is not simply a village that died for France, but a village that refused to return. Deep beneath the rolling fields of northern France, beneath the vineyards, the poppy-covered battlefields, and the solemn memorials, there lies a hidden world, a place where stone meets silence and history lingers in the shadows. These are the war caves, the Kreutz, carved into the limestone bedrock centuries before the First World War and transformed by soldiers into homes, shelters, and shrines. The region of the Ain and the Chemin des Dames is known for its dramatic ridgelines and chalky soil. But below the surface lies a labyrinth of ancient quarries, some stretching for miles, others long forgotten until war found them again. In 1914, as French and German forces clashed and the lines hardened into stalemate, both sides sought shelter wherever they could. Many found it underground. What began as refuge quickly became something more. Inside these war caves, French soldiers, sometimes entire companies, lived for weeks or even months at a time. They dug bunk beds into the walls, created chapels, carved fireplaces, and etched their names and regiments into the stone. There are sculptures of Marianne, the French Republic's symbol of liberty. Crosses, angels, even likenesses of generals and commanders, chiseled with astonishing precision under candlelight. But not all the carvings are so easy to explain. In some of the more remote caves, far from tourist trails or official sites, there are strange symbols, stylized stars, interlocking spirals, human figures with elongated limbs and featureless faces. Some appear almost prehistoric. Others resemble Masonic or alchemical signs. None are officially documented, and most were only discovered long after the war. Who made them, and why? Mainstream historians argue that these symbols were likely the work of individual soldiers passing time or expressing personal beliefs. The isolation, the fear, the endless waiting. These were men under extraordinary psychological strain. Artistic expression may have been a form of escape, or coping. But there are other theories. Some researchers suggest that these symbols mirror ancient markings found in French catacombs and Druidic sites. Is it possible the soldiers stumbled upon older chambers, long hidden, and added their own marks beside forgotten ones? Or could some of these caves have served sacred purposes long before the war, reawakened by soldiers who didn't fully understand what they were entering? Adding to the mystery, A number of these markings appear only in caves that were never officially mapped or recorded in military archives. Local legends speak of passageways sealed after the war, some intentionally collapsed, others quietly erased from maps. Why? In 1995, a team of amateur spelunkers near Craonne stumbled into an unmapped cavern complex believed to have housed over 200 men during the war. Among the standard carvings, names, regimental crests, Christian iconography, they found a circular room with an unusual stone pillar at its center. Around the base were carvings, unlike anything seen in other crypts: concentric circles, spiral notches, and what appeared to be a pair of eyes, always watching. The site was quickly cordoned off, officially due to safety concerns, but photos leaked before the closure. Experts were puzzled. The carvings didn't match any known military symbols, and there were no corresponding unit records to explain who had occupied the cave, or why the space felt, as one historian put it, ritualistic. Was it simply a space for quiet reflection, a personal sanctuary, or something less understood? Further complicating matters, some of these caves show signs of having been sealed off with surprising speed, abandoned mid-use. Food tins left unopened, blankets still folded, sculptures unfinished. In one, tools were still wedged into the limestone wall, as if the carver had left and never returned. What drove them out? German artillery, gas, or something else? In the decades since, access to many of these war caves has become restricted. Some have collapsed. Others lie beneath private land or forgotten forest. A few are still accessible, but only with permission and expert guidance. And with every passing year, their stories grow fainter. Even so, fragments of their mystery remain. Graffiti left behind speaks in layers, soldiers signing their names beneath older, weathered marks from generations past. In one cave, a modern historian found a message scratched faintly into the wall, written in broken Latin. Ad inferos nos ducunt. They lead us to the underworld. Was it a joke? A warning? Or simply the work of a scholar soldier with a dramatic streak? Today, when explorers descend into the few accessible crypts, they describe the same sensations. The temperature drops, the air grows still, and time seems to slow. Some claim to hear dripping water where none falls. Others speak of the strange acoustics, voices echoing in unnatural ways. A few report unease in certain chambers, a presence, real or imagined. Could these be echoes of trauma? Psychological responses to long-forgotten fear? Or is something more embedded in the stone itself? Perhaps the caves, like the men who once sheltered there, have absorbed more than history. Perhaps they hold a kind of memory, etched not just into limestone, but into the very silence that surrounds them. One of the last surviving French veterans of the Great War once described the caves as the belly of the earth, warm at first, then cold with time. He wouldn't say more. Only that some of what was carved down there was never meant to be found again. So, what truly lies beneath the soil of northern France? A forgotten sanctuary? A hidden chapter of wartime art? Or something older, stranger, waiting in the dark? As the walls crumble and moss overtakes the carvings, the answers may be vanishing with them, but the mystery remains. Silent, carved in stone, just below our feet, tucked behind ivy-covered brick walls in the quiet English countryside of Hampshire, an unremarkable building rests beneath overgrown trees. Today, it's mostly silent, swallowed by time, fenced off, and overlooked even by locals. But more than a century ago, behind its reinforced doors, a team of minds worked in absolute secrecy. It was known simply as Room X. Long before the famed code breakers of Bletchley Park would crack the Nazi enigma in the Second World War, there was another chapter, one far less known and far more enigmatic. Room X was part of the British Admiralty's shadowy intelligence efforts during the First World War. Housed within a nondescript facility reportedly linked to the Naval Intelligence Division, it predated the well-known Room 40, the official decoding unit based at the old Admiralty building in London. While Room 40 has been publicly documented, its role in intercepting and deciphering the infamous Zimmermann telegram, now a staple of military history, Room X remains largely absent from official records, and that absence is where the mystery begins. According to fragments found in personal correspondence and declassified memos, Room X was established as a parallel, or possibly rival unit focused on more experimental code work. It was composed not only of linguists and naval officers, but of mathematicians, philosophers, and even 2 members of the Society for Psychical Research. Why? What kind of intelligence required thinkers from such diverse and, in some cases, unconventional backgrounds? The trail grows even more curious when we examine a set of encoded documents unearthed in 1987 in a private estate in Kent. These papers, heavily water-damaged but partially legible, contained ciphered messages dated 1915 to 1917. While many followed known British encryption systems of the era, a few featured symbols not consistent with any official code used by the Royal Navy or Army. Some of the characters bore resemblance to runic alphabets. Others appeared to be invented entirely. One message was never fully decoded, but experts who reviewed it noted its strange formatting. It contained multiple references to WK line phase shift and mirror rotations between layers. Was this simply an internal notation system for advanced encryption mechanics? Or something more theoretical, perhaps even bordering on the experimental physics of the time? The mystery deepens when you consider testimony from a naval clerk stationed in Portsmouth in late 1916. Decades later, in a quiet interview for the Imperial War Museum, he described delivering sealed dispatches to a site he called the Cottage with No Name, a reference believed to point to the same facility associated with Room X. His orders were strict: no questions, no contact, no acknowledgement. The dispatches, he said, were not for the Admiralty, not for the War Office, but for something in between. What was being studied in Room X? Officially, the unit never existed. Freedom of information requests in recent years have yielded vague responses or outright denials. Yet at least 3 retired British officers, in separate interviews given in the 1960s and 70s, mentioned Room X in passing, always with a quiet tone, a glance away from the microphone, as if unsure whether they'd said too much. One officer described it cryptically as a place where ideas became paper, and paper sometimes became action. Another claimed that Room X was where we listened, not just to the Germans, but to the world itself. It's statements like these that have led to fringe theories, ranging from the plausible to the extraordinary. Some researchers suggest Room X may have experimented with early forms of radio-based code breaking long before such techniques were formalized. Perhaps they were intercepting ultra-low frequency signals or monitoring anomalous electromagnetic events, trying to decipher patterns in enemy communications hidden deeper than mere Morse. Others propose that Room X was Britain's first attempt at signals intelligence informed by data beyond the battlefield. Observations of natural phenomena, shifts in solar activity, even theories linking cryptographic randomness to quantum behavior, decades before the term quantum cryptography was even coined. More speculative still is the claim, voiced quietly in niche academic circles, that Room X may have served a metaphysical intelligence purpose. A place where encrypted dreams, visions, or unconscious pattern recognition were analyzed alongside intercepted messages. This would explain the presence of the psychical researchers. It may also tie into wartime stories of sudden intuitions and premonitions that saved ships from torpedoes or guided pilots through fog. There is no hard evidence for such theories, but the absence of evidence has become part of the puzzle. The structure itself, assumed to be the original Room X, is now under private ownership. It's been designated as historically sensitive, but remains closed to the public. Aerial thermal scans done in 2011 suggested the presence of underground rooms or tunnels, but when questions were raised in Parliament about excavation or access, the matter was quietly dismissed. Why would a forgotten building from a war long past still warrant such discretion? One final curiosity. In 2009, a journal from a Room 40 codebreaker was auctioned at a private estate sale. Among pages of code notes and personal reflections, a single sentence stood out, scrawled in the margin beside a list of cipher keys. X sees what we don't. Was it a joke? A nod to secrecy? Or a quiet admission that Room X operated on a level not even Room 40 could reach? The British war machine was vast, brilliant, and often layered in compartments of secrecy. But Room X, if it ever officially existed, seems to defy even those boundaries. So we are left to ask, was it a test bed for the most advanced encryption of its time? A listening post beyond the technological horizon? Or something else entirely, buried not just in stone, but in silence? Whatever the truth, Room X remains unmarked on any wartime map, and perhaps, like the codes it once deciphered, it was meant never to be understood. It begins, as so many war stories do, with a letter. Folded crisply, its ink faded to a pale sepia, the envelope bears a field postmark from 1916. The address is handwritten with care, the script elegant, almost poetic. To Miss Eleanor Sharp, Ashton-under-Lyne, Lancashire. But inside, the words take a stranger turn. Today, the soldier writes, the sun did not rise, or if it did, none of us saw it. A pale light fell, yes, but it was wrong. The shadows were crooked, and the birds silent. I thought perhaps I was dreaming, but the others noticed it too. Something passed over us. Not an enemy, not anything we've words for. For years, this letter was dismissed as battlefield rambling, a hallucination born of exhaustion, fear, or gas exposure. But then another surfaced, and then another. Scattered across archives, private collections, and family boxes of keepsakes, researchers have uncovered over 24 World War I letters, many written by different soldiers from different regiments, even different fronts, that share similar, unsettling themes. What connects them isn't allegiance, geography, or mission. It's atmosphere. An otherworldly tone. A sense that something deeper was happening on the front lines than history has recorded. Some speak of unnatural silence, entire mornings without the chirping of birds or the distant murmur of gunfire. Others describe metallic rain, in which no water fell, but a sound, high, crystalline, endless, echoed across the trenches, leaving men dazed and strangely euphoric for hours afterward. In one case, a French corporal near Verdun wrote to his brother, "We dug into a new trench system and found writing in a language I don't know. None of us could read it, but we felt it. Watching us. It was carved into stone. Not German, not ours. It was older." The most famous of these accounts, though long buried in the footnotes of military correspondence, comes from a British lieutenant, Edward Calloway, stationed along the Ypres salient in late 1915. His letter, preserved by his descendants and later published briefly in a 1973 regional journal, describes a night patrol in no man's land. "We were moving quietly," he wrote, "and then nothing. No sound. Not from the lads, not from the Germans, not even the wind. And then, in front of us, a man. Not in uniform. Pale. Tall. He didn't speak. He just raised a hand, slowly, and pointed west. When I turned to ask my sergeant if he saw him, the man was gone. and so was the fog, and so was the fear. Skeptics point to the psychological pressure of trench warfare, long hours without sleep, the ever-present threat of death, exposure to gas attacks and spoiled rations. In such conditions, hallucinations and surreal experiences would be expected. But the strangeness isn't always in what was seen. It's in what was known. One particularly disturbing letter, written by a German soldier named Karl Meyer and intercepted in early 1917, contains a precise description of a bombardment that would not occur for another 9 days. The names of the towns, the casualties, even the weather on the day of the attack match historical records. Yet the letter was dated, stamped, and sent well before any plans for the operation had been finalized. How could that be? Could it be a forgery? A misdated stamp? A clever, if cruel, trick? Or was it something else? One French historian, Jacques Devereux, speculated in a 1982 interview that the conditions of trench warfare may have altered human perception in unknown ways. Perhaps, he said, these men were not imagining things, but tuning into something, a collapse of time, a shift in reality. The war broke the world in so many ways. Who's to say it didn't break time itself? Even military censors took notice. Several letters containing strange or unexplainable content were flagged and removed from mail circulation, marked with internal notations like 031 Psych or non-essential, retain. Some of these survive only in fragments, retyped by clerks and preserved in obscure intelligence files. One such file, now declassified, includes the phrase, unusual frequency of anomalous reports, cause undetermined but disruptive to morale. Recommended containment. Containment of what exactly? In recent decades, interest in these letters has re-emerged, not just among historians, but among psychologists, cryptographers, and even physicists. A few researchers have suggested that some of the strange phrasing, repetition patterns, and symbols included in the margins may be early attempts to describe experiences beyond normal sensory input, perhaps even precognitive or extrasensory perceptions triggered by extreme trauma. Of course, there's no hard evidence for such claims, and many letters are surely just what they appear to be, the fragmented thoughts of men enduring the unimaginable. Still, the similarities between certain accounts, across borders, languages, and months, are difficult to ignore. Why did so many soldiers, completely unknown to each other, describe the same unnatural silence? Why do multiple letters mention a man in white who appears just before major attacks? And why do some of the most unsettling accounts, those never meant to reach the public, end abruptly, mid-sentence, as if something interrupted their very writing? One letter, found among the belongings of a Canadian soldier killed at Passchendaele, ends with a line that has baffled readers ever since. We walk in the mud, but we dream in stone, and the stone dreams back. What does it mean? Was it simply poetry? A metaphor born of misery? Or was he trying to tell us something no longer possible to understand? As we examine the remaining fragments, yellowed and fragile, the mystery remains. Folded between the pages of history, speaking in a quiet voice from a war louder than any before. And we're left to wonder, were these soldiers only writing letters? Or were they reaching beyond the veil, trying to explain what even they could not name? In the early morning mist that lingers across the old railway lines of northern France and Belgium, time seems to soften. The air hangs heavy with damp earth and memory, and if you stand quietly enough beside the rusting rails, half consumed by grass and shadow, you may hear it. A distant rumble, faint at first, the soft churning of wheels, the hiss of steam. Then, silence. There is no train. But for more than a century, locals, veterans, and even Allied officers have spoken in hushed tones of the ghost trains of the Western Front. Trains that were heard, sometimes seen, but never arrived. Or if they did, left no trace. Railways were the arteries of World War I. From the channel ports to the forward trenches, they carried men, horses, shells, and steel through a war that devoured resources faster than any conflict before it. Entire lines were constructed in weeks, snaking through woods and fields to feed the front. Narrow-gauge trench railways, often laid just behind the lines, became lifelines, sometimes the last journey for the wounded, sometimes the last ride for the living. And yet, amidst this web of logistics and iron, something strange began to emerge. The first reports come from the autumn of 1915, near Ypres. British engineers laying new track along a supply corridor reported hearing the approach of an engine, loud, close, unmistakable. The crew stepped aside to allow the train to pass, but none came. The sound faded into the distance, like smoke and wind. They thought little of it at first, but the reports multiplied. In early 1916, French troops bivouacked near Soissons reported a train running through their sector every night at 2:13 a.m. Always the same time. Always the same sound. But no one ever saw it. It didn't appear on any schedule. No lights, no whistle. Only sound. And the tremble of earth. Was it an auditory mirage? A trick of wind across the flat plains? Wartime nerves? Perhaps. But in the spring of 1917, something more tangible occurred. A German reconnaissance balloon spotted a train moving across Allied territory near Arras. The balloon operator sketched the outline. 4 flatbed cars, 1 boxcar, a locomotive with an unusually tall smokestack. The report was logged. But when German artillery attempted to target the train's path, nothing was hit. A British intelligence officer later confirmed that no such train had operated in that sector during that time frame. And then came the story of Train 4537. In British rail records, Train 4537 was scheduled to depart from Abbeville on July 10, 1917, bound for forward logistics near Albert. It was to carry rations, medical supplies, and 26 personnel. The departure was logged, but it never arrived, and there was no record of its route after it left the station. Initially, authorities assumed it had been destroyed by enemy fire. A search was conducted. No wreckage was found. Not a single splinter of wood, not a single wheel. No bodies, just absence. The official report classified it as missing due to enemy action, presumed destroyed. But rumors spread. Soldiers spoke of a train seen traveling at night, lights dimmed, engine silent. A train with no markings, vanishing into morning mist. Some claimed they'd seen the same model weeks later, abandoned on a siding, windows dark, doors closed. But when they returned, it was gone. Was it a logistical error? A theft? A cover-up? Or something more elusive? Historians have long debated the ghost train phenomenon. Some suggest many of the reports can be explained by overlapping lines of communication and the chaos of wartime logistics. Rail lines were often hastily built, poorly recorded, and shared between armies. Trains may have been rerouted without notice, leading to confusion and speculation. Others argue that battlefield acoustics played a role. Artillery fire, terrain, and atmospheric conditions could distort sound over distance. The clatter of a train 10 kilometers away might seem as if it were passing nearby, but there are elements that don't fit so neatly. Why were some of these trains seen by multiple eyewitnesses, troops and civilians alike, who later described identical details? Why did entire platoons halt to let trains pass that never arrived? Why do some old maps, archived in French and Belgian transport ministries, include sidings and depots that were never completed, or never confirmed to have existed? There is also the matter of Sector 519, an area near the Belgian village of Langemarck. In 1918, British sappers uncovered a tunnel entrance, hidden beneath what appeared to be a collapsed line. Inside, they found rusted tools, warped track, and what appeared to be a train buffer beam. No train. No chassis. Just the mark where one had once stood. The tunnel itself had been sealed at both ends. There were no plans for its construction, and no record of what had been buried there, or why. Some fringe theorists suggest these so-called ghost trains are temporal echoes, resonances from moments of high emotional or energetic intensity. That, like battlefield hauntings, these trains are imprinted on the landscape itself, replaying their final journeys to those sensitive enough to perceive them. Others believe they are real, trains hidden for espionage, carrying experimental cargo, or rerouted to destinations now scrubbed from official history. Their disappearance, some claim, was no accident, but erasure. Of course, no solid evidence has ever been presented, and yet, the stories persist. In 2003, a hiker near Vimy Ridge reported hearing a train while walking along a disused line. The time was just after midnight. There was no one else nearby, no engines in service, just the sudden whistle and the faint smell of coal smoke. Could it have been an illusion? Or did he, like so many before him, witness a memory trapped in steel and steam? Perhaps the ghost trains of the Western Front are simply fragments of war's chaotic machinery, lost in time and misremembered. Or perhaps they are something else entirely, still riding unseen, their tracks buried beneath silence, waiting for someone to listen. The plains of northern France stretch out in silence now, quiet, windswept fields dotted with the occasional concrete remnant, rusted barbed wire buried beneath wildflowers. But beneath this peaceful surface, the ground remembers. There are places here, sections of farmland and empty forest, where entire villages vanished, not by artillery, but by deliberate design. This is where Operation Alberich unfolded. In early 1917, the German High Command made a calculated and unsettling decision. Facing growing pressure on the Western Front, they initiated a large-scale withdrawal from the Somme region to a new, heavily fortified line known as the Hindenburg Line. On paper, the operation was strategic: consolidate defenses, shorten supply routes, and force the Allies to fight on less favorable terrain. But what truly marked Alberich wasn't just the retreat. It was what the Germans left behind, or more precisely, what they destroyed. As part of the withdrawal, entire towns were evacuated of their remaining civilian population. Wells were poisoned, trees were felled, roads were mined. Every building, churches, schools, homes, was rigged to collapse or burned to cinders. The earth itself was gouged, cratered, and flooded. What was once habitable was transformed into a lifeless, scorched no-man's land. But there are parts of this story that don't add up. British and French forces advancing into the evacuated zone expected destruction, but not the level of precision they encountered. In some villages, entire rows of houses were removed with mathematical exactness. Stone foundations vanished as if never laid. In others, roads that had existed for centuries were erased entirely, paved over or rerouted to confuse maps and navigators. Why would a retreating army invest so much effort not just in ruin, but in deception? Was this scorched earth policy purely strategic? Or was something else being hidden? Among the recovered documents after the war was a partial operations plan, dated February 1917, detailing the mechanics of the withdrawal. It outlined the destruction of infrastructure and the relocation of materials, but several pages were missing. Specifically, a section labeled Alberich, Zusatz, or Appendix. Some believe this appendix may have contained alternate objectives, goals never disclosed in official channels. And then there's the case of Douchy-les-Sayet, a small village south of Arras. Reconnaissance photographs from January 1917 show a settlement intact. But when Allied troops entered 2 months later, not only was the village gone, it had been dug out. Beneath the ruins, they found an elaborate underground network: rail beds, storage vaults, concrete-lined chambers. None of it had been documented before. Who built it, and why erase it so thoroughly? The German military was known for engineering prowess. Tunnels, bunkers, and redoubts were not unusual. But some of the materials found in the Douchy chambers were not standard issue. An unusual alloyed steel, marked only with numbers, and a sigil resembling a spiral. Some witnesses later claimed the rooms had been used for testing acoustic devices or subterranean communications. These claims, though never substantiated, added an unnerving layer to the mystery. A British intelligence memo, dated April 1917, hints at confusion within Allied command. It states, "Enemy withdrawal does not conform to standard patterns of strategic retreat. Unclear whether this is masking new technology or new doctrine." Could Operation Alberich have involved secret experiments, perhaps tests of infrastructure denial, or even early psychological warfare? One recovered diary from a German engineering officer, captured and later archived at the Imperial War Museum, adds more questions. He wrote cryptically, "The last load was taken down on March 3rd. No sound, no trace. Even the birds would not sing above the hatch." What was the last load? Where was it taken? And why this eerie silence? Some historians propose that Alberich masked the relocation of key assets, early prototypes of weapons, or perhaps sensitive documents, technologies, or personnel meant to be hidden from both allies and other factions within Germany itself. Others, pointing to folklore and the operation's name, Alberich, after the mythological dwarf from the Nibelungenlied who guards a treasure of immense power, suggest the codename itself was a clue, a nod to something being protected, buried, or obscured under layers of myth and earth. Could the Germans have unearthed, or sought to hide, something older? There is, after all, a strange pattern of pre-Roman ruins found within the Alberich zone: circular stone arrangements, subterranean passageways predating the war by centuries, their original purpose unknown. Perhaps the retreat allowed German teams to examine these sites in secret, using wartime movement as cover. Of course, mainstream scholars dismiss such theories as reaching beyond the evidence. They point instead to the pragmatism of war, the cold calculus of land, resources, and survival. Operation Alberich, they argue, was a desperate but rational act. Nothing more. And yet, something lingers. To this day, in certain corners of Picardy, farmers report finding bricks where no building stood. Tools buried in layers too deep for a few decades. Strange metal objects etched with unfamiliar markings. One landowner, renovating a barn in 2004, discovered a trapdoor hidden beneath floorboards that didn't match the original structure. Beneath it, a concrete shaft sealed with lead. He contacted authorities. The shaft was examined and quietly filled in. No official report was filed. What, if anything, remains beneath these fields? Was Operation Alberich simply a military maneuver? Or was it something deeper, an erasure, not just of land and homes, but of knowledge? As we walk these lands today, it is hard to tell where the past ends and the mystery begins. And perhaps that is exactly as it was meant to be. Beneath the soft, shifting light of Sarajevo's late afternoon sun, the Miljacka River curls like a pale ribbon through the city's center. Cobblestone streets and 19th century facades line the banks, still bearing the memory of that fateful day, June 28, 1914, when a gunshot fired on the Latin Bridge echoed across continents and changed the course of history. It is here, at this crossroads of fate and empire, that Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie were assassinated. Most people know this part of the story. Few know what happened next, to the man behind the wheel. Leopold Lojka was his name, a Czech-born chauffeur in the service of the Austro-Hungarian military elite. On that day, Lojka took a wrong turn, one that would place the Archduke and Duchess directly in the line of Gavrilo Princip's revolver. A mistake, a single moment, and the world unraveled. But what became of Lojka? Strangely, his story fades almost entirely from public view. While the names of assassins and emperors fill textbooks, the man who drove the car into the gunfire is little more than a footnote. And yet, in that silence, something unsettling stirs. In the years following the assassination, Lojka returned to his hometown of Moravia. By all accounts, he was a changed man, withdrawn, anxious, prone to nightmares. Friends said he would often wake in the night screaming, reliving the moment he made that wrong turn. Some say he drank heavily. Others claim he spoke of being watched. He died reportedly of a stroke in 1926. The cause of death was listed as natural, and he was buried in an unassuming grave in the town of Brno. But questions linger, because there's more to this story than just a chauffeur's regret. First, there's the matter of the order of that day's route. Officially, the itinerary had been agreed upon and circulated among the security team. The motorcade was to follow a straight line to the town hall. But at some point, Lojka veered off that path, taking the side road where Princip just happened to be standing. Was it simply a mistake? Or was Lojka following an outdated version of the route? Some records suggest he had not been briefed on the last-minute change. If that's true, why wasn't he? A logistical error, or something more intentional? Eyewitnesses claimed that just moments before the fatal turn, a police officer waved the car forward toward Franz Joseph Street, not Appel Quay. That officer was never identified. His name does not appear in any of the post-event inquiries. Who was he? Even more curious are the conflicting reports about Lojka's own behavior. A Serbian journalist named Božidar Mitrović claimed in a post-war interview that Lojka was unusually calm during the chaos, that he did not accelerate when the first shot was fired, that he even looked resigned. That account was dismissed. Mitrović was labeled unreliable, but in the archives of the Vienna War Museum there is an internal military memo dated 1930, 4 years after Lojka's death. The memo, which remained classified until 1982, references continued inquiries into the loyalties of the late driver Lojka, citing a pattern of contacts with suspect groups in Prague and Sarajevo. What those groups were is never specified. Was this paranoia, post-war scapegoating, or a quiet recognition that the driver of the most consequential vehicle in modern history may not have been acting entirely alone? There's also a peculiar entry in the archives of the Austro-Hungarian Ministry of the Interior, a requisition form dated July 3, 1914 for a payment, some undisclosed, to the family of LL for discretion and loyalty in imperial service. That form was signed by a high-ranking official and then buried. No other record connects that payment to any named individual. Was it a pension or a payoff? Fringe theorists have long speculated that the assassination was allowed to happen, or even facilitated, by elements within the empire looking for a pretext for war. They point to the bizarre lapses in security, the absence of backup plans, the fact that the motorcade stopped for a full minute just feet away from a known insurgent. And in every version of that theory, one man is essential: the driver. Some believe Lojka was coerced, that he was approached beforehand, threatened, bribed, perhaps even blackmailed. Others suggest he was an unwitting pawn, fed incorrect information by someone inside the Archduke's own staff. Then there are those who think Loika never truly spoke about that day because he wasn't allowed to. His death in 1926 is, on the surface, unremarkable. No foul play was officially suspected, but his grave has been vandalized repeatedly over the decades, each time the same. No slogans, no graffiti, just the gravestone cracked. Once even removed completely and placed, oddly, at the foot of the church steps. Why would someone do that? Was it resentment? Superstition? Or a message? If Loika did play a larger role, wittingly or not, then his silence makes sense. The less remembered about him, the fewer questions asked. But perhaps the deeper mystery lies in how history itself forgets certain people. A man at the wheel of fate, forgotten, or perhaps erased. In the quiet of Brno's cemetery, under a canopy of pine trees, the driver's headstone stands again, restored, modest, mostly ignored. But if you lean in close, you'll notice something odd. A faint engraving just below his name, nearly lost to erosion. It reads simply, "I was there." What did Leopold Loika truly see? What did he know? Was he just a man caught in a moment, or something more? The world remembers the shot, the spark, the Archduke. But history rarely looks at the hands that turn the wheel. And in that forgotten turn, perhaps, still lies a truth waiting to be uncovered. Beneath the searing blue sky of the Sinai Peninsula, where the sand stretches endlessly and the wind sings a low, haunting tune through ancient canyons, lies a land both stark and storied. The desert here is not silent. It is watchful. Every dune and rock conceals layers of forgotten history, of pilgrims, pharaohs, and in the early 20th century, soldiers caught in the storm of World War I. The Sinai Desert served as a crucial corridor during the war, linking the Suez Canal to the eastern frontier of the Ottoman Empire. While British and Commonwealth forces defended the canal, the Ottomans launched repeated campaigns across the sand, pressing westward into Egypt. But it's what was found beneath the ground that continues to puzzle historians and archaeologists alike. Scattered across remote parts of northern Sinai, a network of tunnels, some shallow, others surprisingly deep, was uncovered in the decades following the war. Cut through limestone and sandstone, these passages were often reinforced with timber or stone and occasionally marked with Ottoman military script. At first glance, these tunnels appeared to serve a familiar purpose: troop movement, protection from aerial reconnaissance, and possibly storage of arms or rations. In a landscape so exposed, digging underground was a tactical necessity. But then researchers began noticing inconsistencies. Many of the tunnels didn't align with known Ottoman positions. Some were located miles from the front lines in places with no documented military activity. Others descended far deeper than necessary for simple cover. One shaft near El Arish reached over 30 meters below the surface and led into a circular chamber with strange inscriptions on the walls, neither Arabic nor Turkish, but an unclassified script carved with unusual precision. Who dug these deeper structures and why? Was the Ottoman army repurposing ancient tunnels for their own use? Or did they construct these enigmatic chambers with specific intent, something beyond wartime logistics? British intelligence reports from 1917 reference disruptive underground activity near the Gaza border. One dispatch from the Royal Engineers describes stumbling upon a tunnel that vanished into bedrock with no apparent ventilation and no sound. The soldiers were instructed not to enter and to seal the entrance. Why the secrecy? Some have suggested the tunnels were used not just for movement, but for experimentation. The Ottomans, allied with the Germans, were known to be exploring unconventional technologies at the time. Could these remote desert tunnels have been a testing ground, away from prying eyes? One recovered field diary from a Turkish officer speaks cryptically of silent movement beneath the dunes, and listening chambers where no footfall could be heard above. No military purpose for such chambers has ever been confirmed. Other local accounts point to something stranger still. Bedouin oral tradition recalls the whispering caves used by the men in green and red during the Great War, figures who would emerge only at dusk and vanish before dawn. One elder, interviewed in the 1970s, described how entire patrols would disappear near certain wadis, leaving no tracks behind. He said the earth there swallowed men whole. A poetic metaphor? Perhaps. But even modern satellite scans of the Sinai have revealed abnormal depressions in areas long assumed untouched. Subsurface imaging, conducted in 2008 by a joint archaeology team, confirmed the existence of geometric voids beneath the sand, perfect squares and rectangles laid out with architectural symmetry. What military need would justify such precision in a barren desert? Fringe theorists, as expected, have filled the silence. Some claim the tunnels connect to far older networks, ancient trade routes or lost cities beneath the sands, hidden for millennia and rediscovered by Ottoman engineers. Others propose more speculative ideas, secret weapons caches, communications experiments, or even evidence of contact with now forgotten desert religions that once flourished in the region. Interestingly, the Ottoman command was deeply invested in the mystique of the Middle East. Records show certain officers carried not only maps but religious texts, geomantic diagrams, and old Arabic scrolls. The war in the desert was as much psychological as physical. Could these tunnels have played a role in that unseen front? There's also a linguistic curiosity. In a sealed chamber near Rafah, a British archaeological team discovered stone tiles bearing what looked like inscriptions. They were removed for study but mysteriously went missing en route to Cairo. A single photograph survived, taken before transport. The symbols etched into the tile don't match Ottoman Turkish, nor any Semitic script. Some resemble characters found in South Arabian ruins dating back to the first millennium BC. What were they doing beneath a World War I tunnel? Could the Ottoman military have uncovered something far older and tried to conceal it beneath their modern defenses? The Sinai has always been a place where ancient history and modern conflict overlap, but the deeper one looks, the more blurred that boundary becomes. Beneath the sand lies a matrix of timelines, some understood, many not. Why were some of these tunnels built with such permanence? What needed to be hidden so carefully, so remotely? To this day, access to several of the most enigmatic sites remains restricted. Local authorities cite safety concerns, collapsing shafts, unexploded ordnance, unstable terrain, but no detailed surveys have been released. Requests for excavation permits are routinely denied. What is still buried beneath the desert floor? Are the Ottoman tunnels merely relics of wartime desperation, or are they markers of a deeper, older narrative, one that threads through the very heart of the Sinai, silent but watching? The sands have shifted many times since the war ended, but perhaps, just beneath the surface, something waits. As the morning mist curls low over the scarred fields of Ypres, the stillness today feels almost unnatural. Tall grasses sway gently where trenches once carved deep scars into the Belgian earth. And at a forgotten crossroads, just east of Hooge near Menin Road, the land remembers. A junction once known by soldiers with a name that conjured dread, Hellfire Corner. To pass through this stretch during the war was to step into a crucible of fire and steel. During the height of the conflict, Hellfire Corner was considered the most dangerous spot on the Western Front. A narrow, exposed intersection under constant German observation, it was relentlessly shelled, often without warning. Few who traversed it on foot, horseback, or in vehicle did so without feeling they were gambling with death. Today, the trees have grown back and the craters have softened with time. But something about the atmosphere here remains charged, as if the air itself still carries the weight of something unseen. British dispatch riders, those tasked with moving messages between front lines and command posts, spoke often of the place. They described moments of overwhelming pressure, of time seeming to slow as they approached the junction. One rider, Corporal Alfred Noyce, wrote in his field journal, "The road sings. Just before the bend, the world turns silent, and the tires hum like wires in a storm." A poetic flourish? Perhaps, but others noted similar sensations. Reports from both British and Commonwealth troops spoke of invisible walls of heat, flashes with no source, and even a sound like whispering gravel, long before shells landed or rifles fired. One officer, in an official report, described it as a pressure on the lungs, like something watching. For many, Hellfire Corner was more than a place. It became a living presence, an entity. And as the war dragged on, strange incidents began to accumulate. Dispatches would vanish en route. Horses would spook and bolt with no audible trigger. Men, hardened veterans, refused to pass the corner alone. On more than one occasion, artillery barrages meant for the German lines would suddenly arc short, striking their own men, always near the junction. Some attributed this to navigational error. Others weren't so sure. A little-known intelligence memo from 1917, declassified decades later, mentions a British engineer who claimed electromagnetic interference near the intersection disrupted his wireless experiments. He was trying to establish short-range field communication, but the equipment would flicker wildly near the junction and then shut down completely. Once moved several hundred meters west, it functioned normally. Could there have been a natural explanation? Perhaps a convergence of subterranean minerals or an anomaly in the local magnetic field? Or was something else at work? Local civilians had long avoided the area, even before the war. Older residents of Ypres, when questioned after the armistice, spoke of the land around Hooge and Menin Road as being cursed. One tale, passed down through generations, told of a monk executed on the site during the 16th century, struck down for heresy and buried at the crossroads, bound in chains. Another legend tells of Roman soldiers marching endlessly across the plain at dusk, searching for a battle long lost. Curious folklore, certainly. But these stories weren't known to the average British rifleman or Australian sapper in 1917, and yet they, too, felt something unexplainable there. In 1918, a chaplain named Edward Fairborn documented an incident involving two stretcher-bearers sent to retrieve a wounded corporal. The men reported hearing their comrade call for help just past Hellfire Corner. They entered the area, but never returned. When a larger search party followed, they found no bodies, no footprints, no sign of struggle. The corporal had died hours earlier, confirmed by a medic stationed a mile away. So what did the men hear? In recent years, military historians and battlefield archaeologists have returned to the area, scanning it with modern tools. Ground-penetrating radar has revealed layers of trench systems and bunkers long collapsed beneath the surface. Nothing so far has offered any clear explanation for the strange reports. But some anomalies remain. Patches where vegetation refuses to grow. Sudden shifts in temperature noted by environmental sensors. Shortwave radio crackling when vehicles pass over specific spots. What are we really sensing here? Is it just the psychological residue of trauma? Memories etched into soil and stone? Can a place bear the emotional imprint of tens of thousands of lives, lost in fear and fire? Could the sensations described by so many be a form of collective memory, echoes of terror reverberating across time? There are those who look for rational causes. Some scientists speculate that localized acoustic anomalies caused by crater shapes and ruined structures might have amplified or distorted sound, creating auditory hallucinations under stress. Others point to carbon monoxide buildup from long-buried munitions as a possible contributor to lightheadedness or altered perception. But then there are the stories that resist categorization. One Canadian officer in 1916 claimed he saw figures moving along the tree line near Hellfire Corner, uniformed but indistinct. He assumed they were his own men. When he approached, the figures faded into the mist. No one else had seen them. A similar report emerged in 1993 from a visiting war historian who was walking the old route at dusk. He claimed to have heard boots crunching gravel just behind him, steady, measured steps. When he turned, no one was there. He was alone. The mystery of Hellfire Corner lingers not because of a single event, but because of a pattern, repeated moments of the unexplained layered over decades. No definitive answers, no hard proof, just the quiet suggestion that something there defies full understanding. What lingers in a place soaked in so much fear and violence? Do the ghosts of war speak not in words, but in feelings, in the hush before the wind, the tension in the chest, the inexplicable sensation of being watched? Perhaps Hellfire Corner is more than just a dangerous road in a brutal war. Perhaps it is one of those rare places where history is not only remembered, but relived, where the silence is not silence, and the past has not quite let go. And as we move beyond the crossroads of Hellfire Corner, where memory clings like fog to the land, we enter another stretch of Belgium's war-torn fields, one that hides its secrets more quietly, more completely. Here, near the quiet countryside around Zonnebeke and Langemark, where sheep now graze and poppies return each spring, strange reports have filtered in for decades. Reports of trenches that aren't there anymore. Not collapsed, not eroded, but gone. The terrain appears unremarkable at first glance. Rolling farmland, lines of trees in the distance, the occasional shell crater filled with rainwater. A place of peace. Yet old war maps, aerial photographs from reconnaissance flights, and first-hand accounts from soldiers all agree. These fields once held a dense network of trenches, some British, others German, dug deep into the Flanders clay. So why have so many vanished completely? Not merely hidden by time and vegetation, but erased so thoroughly that even advanced radar sometimes returns. Nothing? Trenches were once everywhere here. Vast zigzagging fortifications that stretched from farm to farm, village to village, forming the backbone of Western Front strategy. Some were shallow and temporary. Others, fortified with timber and concrete, were meant to last. Military engineers mapped them in painstaking detail. War diaries reference specific trench names: Beetroot Trench, Piccadilly Avenue, Kaiser's Cut. After the war, many of these names faded, but the structures themselves should have left traces. Collapsed wood, rusted barbed wire, even subtle changes in soil composition. And yet, in several areas across West Flanders, entire trench systems have seemingly disappeared. In 2006, a Belgian archaeological team from Ghent University conducted a subsurface scan in the fields east of Passchendaele. Their aim was to locate remnants of a known British trench line documented in October 1917. But after weeks of scanning, ground radar, magnetometry, and core sampling, they found no structural anomalies. No wood, no metal, just undisturbed earth. Perplexed, they returned to original trench maps drawn during the war. The trench had existed. It was there during the Third Battle of Ypres. British soldiers fought and died defending it. One private, Charles W. Jenkins, even wrote in a letter home, "We call it the Hollow Spade, because no matter how we dig, the ground seems to shift beneath us. Shifting ground. A metaphor for the terror of war? Or something more literal? Local folklore, much of it predating the war, tells of swallowing fields, places where the land drinks the dead. Farmers for generations told stories of livestock vanishing into soft earth, of entire trees sinking overnight after heavy rains. These may sound like exaggerations, but the geology of the region does include underground aquifers, pockets of clay, and even historical peat beds that can collapse under certain conditions. Could natural processes explain the disappearance? Possibly, but not entirely. Even in cases where trenches collapsed, modern LiDAR scanning usually reveals subtle depressions, linear features, anomalies in vegetation density, variations in moisture. These signatures linger for decades, even centuries. But in the so-called clean zones around certain fields in Zonnebeke and Boesinge, no such traces remain. It's as though the trenches were never there. More curiously, when metal detectors sweep these zones, they come up strangely quiet. No bullets, no shell fragments, no corroded buttons or bayonets. This is highly unusual for Western Front battlefields, which are notorious for what local farmers still call the iron harvest. Shrapnel and spent munitions turned up with every plow. Why would entire segments of battlefield vanish so cleanly? One theory, grounded in practicality, suggests extensive post-war cleanup. After the armistice, Allied forces and local governments conducted massive clearing operations. Trenches were filled in, timber salvaged, debris buried. Could these fields have been cleaned with unusual thoroughness? Perhaps. But it's important to remember that most cleanups were hurried, uneven, and often avoided areas too dangerous to approach, those littered with unexploded shells or suspected gas pockets. Then there are the anecdotal accounts. A 1934 interview with a British veteran named Harold Blakely recalls a nighttime patrol near Langemark. He claimed his squad had discovered a freshly dug trench, one that hadn't been there the night before. It was empty, silent. They entered to investigate, but after just a few yards, one man fell through a section of ground into what he described as a void of black air. The patrol retreated. When they returned at dawn, the trench was gone. Could this be a false memory? Trauma reshaping recollection? Or could unstable terrain cause sudden collapses so complete they erase all trace? Stranger stories emerge from post-war visitors. In the 1950s, a French historian named Etienne Rousseau wandered the same fields with a hand-drawn trench map. He was searching for German observation posts. One evening near Boesinge, he claimed to see a line of shallow trenches reappear after a heavy rain, visible in the low light, like ripples in the earth. He took photographs, but by morning, the features had vanished. The photos? Still archived. Grainy, hard to interpret, but suggestive of shallow depressions too uniform to be natural. Are we dealing with geological illusions, or something more elusive? Environmental scientists suggest changes in soil density, erosion, and crop cycles could temporarily reveal or conceal old trench lines. That may account for Rousseau's sighting, but it doesn't explain the full absence of physical debris in zones where thousands once fought. Some speculative thinkers point to the sheer trauma of the war, suggesting that certain spaces, marked by suffering, respond in ways we don't yet understand. Could it be that some parts of the battlefield reject memory? Does the land heal by forgetting? It's a romantic notion, to be sure. But for those who walk these fields with trench maps and find only silence, no dips, no bones, no shell casings, it feels like something deeper is at work, something the maps can't trace. What remains buried in Belgium is more than just history. It's mystery, a suggestion that the war, in some places, didn't just end. It erased itself. And so, We ask again, can a battlefield vanish? Or is it simply waiting, beneath layers of soil, time, and silence, for someone to look in the right way or at the right moment? From the sun-drenched fields of Flanders to the wind-lashed coasts of the Iberian Peninsula, the Great War stretched far beyond the trenches. And while Belgium's ghostly battlefields remain shrouded in silence, the waters off Spain's rugged northern coast whisper secrets of their own. Secrets submerged not in mud, but in salt and time. Here, in the jagged inlets of Galicia and along the shadowed coves of the Bay of Biscay, a different kind of war unfolded. A quieter one, a hidden war, fought not with massed infantry or thundering artillery, but in the stealthy glide of steel beneath the waves. This is the story of the German U-boats, and the mysterious claims that some found sanctuary in neutral Spain. Officially, Spain maintained neutrality throughout World War I. It did not take up arms, did not declare sides. Yet neutrality does not always mean disengagement. Trade, intelligence, and quiet complicity often weave their way into the gray spaces of war, and it is in those spaces that our mystery begins. In naval records and intelligence briefings from the British Admiralty dated between 1916 and 1918, there are repeated mentions of German submarines seen operating dangerously close to Spanish waters, sometimes entering them entirely. In one report, U-39 was tracked pursuing Allied shipping off the coast of Asturias before disappearing, only to re-emerge 3 days later, seemingly refueled and resupplied. British intelligence suspected a clandestine network of unofficial resupply points, quiet coves, remote harbors, or even civilian fishing ports where U-boats could receive coal, provisions, or intelligence. Was this a case of smuggling, espionage, or something more organized? The evidence is thin, but suggestive. In 1917, the British consul in Vigo sent a confidential memo describing unusual night activity near the harbor, lights at odd hours, small boats coming and going without clearance. He wrote, "Locals say German divers are paid well to keep silent. Some fishermen believe the sea holds more than just fish these nights." At the time, such claims were dismissed as rumors. But over the decades, fragments of evidence have resurfaced, adding weight to the idea of hidden U-boat activity in Spain. In 1981, a diver exploring a sunken fishing vessel off the coast of Galicia reported seeing the curved steel hull of what appeared to be a World War I-era submarine partially embedded in the seabed, not listed among known wrecks. Naval historians debated the find but were unable to confirm the vessel's origin. The area was never excavated. Further inland, in the quiet town of Ferrol, long known for its shipyards and military dockyards, locals still speak of La Sombra Alemana, the German shadow. Old men recall tales passed down from their fathers, of strange men in dark uniforms seen drinking in taverns, of crates hauled from small coastal caves under cover of night. One retired fisherman claimed that his father delivered fresh food to a German captain twice a month during the war. Payment, he said, came in gold coins. Is this merely local legend? Or is it a thread worth pulling? A fringe theory, quietly discussed but never substantiated, suggests that Germany, unable to build a full-scale submarine base on foreign soil, established temporary resupply stations along friendly or complicit coasts. Spain, with its long, under-policed shoreline, became an ideal location. Hidden caves, disused boathouses, even repurposed whaling docks may have played a role. Naval experts point out that early U-boats had a limited operational range. Without reliable resupply, long missions would have been impossible. And yet German submarines were spotted far into the Atlantic, well beyond what fuel and supplies should have allowed. Could these sightings be explained by hidden caches? Clandestine allies? Skeptics argue that most of these claims can be attributed to misidentifications, exaggerated wartime paranoia, or later embellishment. They point out that Spain's government, though neutral, was under scrutiny from both Britain and France, and could not risk hosting enemy vessels without diplomatic fallout. But if these bases were unofficial, perhaps even hidden from the Spanish state itself, arranged through local sympathizers or German agents, the risk becomes harder to trace. In 2003, an amateur historian exploring coastal bunkers near San Sebastian stumbled upon what he believed was a sealed tunnel leading toward the sea. Above it, etched into the concrete lintel, were faded markings, not Spanish, but possibly German. Due to erosion and time, the symbols were never conclusively deciphered. The entrance was later blocked by rockfall. Then there is the curious case of U-28, a submarine officially declared lost in 1917 after a mysterious explosion during an encounter with a British steamer. Yet some later reports suggest sightings of a U-boat matching its description off the Galician coast, months after its presumed destruction. Were these phantom sightings, or a case of mistaken identity? And what of the coded radio transmissions picked up by the Royal Navy in late 1918, originating from somewhere near the Bay of Biscay, transmitting in bursts on German naval frequencies? The signals were never triangulated with certainty. What remains is a pattern of subtle signs, scattered reports, whispers from coastal villages, the occasional discovery of a rusted hatch or fragment of machinery buried in sand. Are these the remnants of a shadow war fought just beneath the surface? Of hidden networks that blurred the lines between neutrality and complicity? Or are we chasing ghosts in the surf? The mystery of German U-boat bases in Spain continues to provoke interest not because of what we know, but because of what we almost know. Because every unexplained sonar reading, every anecdote from a local mariner, hints at a deeper story, one that sits just below the reach of certainty. So we ask, what lies beneath Spain's quiet coves and forgotten harbors? Steel relics of war, or secrets still unspoken? From the windswept cliffs of Spain's northern coast, where rumors of clandestine U-boat refueling haunt the rocky inlets, our journey now leads us south, deep into the winding channels of East Africa's Rufiji Delta. Here, where the muddy waters snake their way through the mangroves, another chapter of World War I whispers beneath the silt and silence. This is where the German light cruiser SMS Königsberg made her final stand, and where, some claim, she took with her not only the last shots of a forgotten naval campaign, but a fortune in gold that has never been recovered. The story begins with warships and imperial ambition. In the summer of 1914, the Königsberg, a sleek and formidable cruiser of the Imperial German Navy, was stationed in the Indian Ocean. As war erupted in Europe, she became a thorn in Britain's maritime side, raiding Allied shipping with precision and speed. She was fast, well-armed, and elusive, but her most daring maneuver was yet to come. After a successful campaign of disruption, the Königsberg vanished into the dense delta of the Rufiji River in what is now Tanzania, then part of German East Africa. There, cloaked in dense jungle and narrow waterways, she lay hidden for months, defying British attempts to find and destroy her. Eventually, British forces located the Königsberg and launched a determined naval siege. After several months of bombardment and tactical maneuvers, the cruiser was finally scuttled by her own crew in July 1915 to prevent capture. Her skeleton still rests in the riverbed, rusted and worn by decades of current and decay. That much is history, documented, agreed upon. But beneath the official account lies a tantalizing mystery. According to several British intelligence documents, intercepted German messages hinted that before the ship's destruction, its cargo, specifically its gold reserves, had been offloaded under cover of darkness and carried inland. These claims were never publicly confirmed, but they sparked curiosity among British officers and colonial authorities. The German military, it was well known, had moved gold around Africa to fund colonial operations, pay local troops, and finance guerrilla warfare against the Allies. Could the Königsberg have carried one of these shipments? And if so, where did it go? The records of the ship's manifest were destroyed when she sank. Survivors of the crew, many of whom joined General Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck's guerrilla campaign in the interior, never spoke of any gold. Or if they did, the accounts were lost to time. And yet, whispers persist. In the years following the war, stories circulated among locals living along the Rufiji. Tales of strange boxes offloaded at night, of mules vanishing into the bush under armed escort. One elderly villager, interviewed in the 1970s by a Tanzanian journalist, described seeing crates as long as a man's arm and heavy like stone, carried by soldiers wearing boots not of Africa. By mid-century, treasure hunters began to arrive. They came from Germany, Britain, and beyond, armed with metal detectors, maps, and old war reports. Some scoured the Königsberg wreck itself, diving into its rusted hull, hoping for hidden compartments or secret vaults. Others turned their attention to the dense jungles and ruins upriver, convinced the treasure had been buried before the British attack. But no gold was ever found. Or was it? One persistent rumor tells of a British officer who discovered a cache of coins hidden inside clay pots in 1923 near the village of Matanza. The coins were reportedly melted down quietly. The find never made public, but no official records or photographs support the story. It remains, like the gold itself, unconfirmed. Another thread in the tale draws us to Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck himself, the legendary German general who led a mobile guerrilla force across thousands of miles of African terrain. His campaign was resourceful and remarkably effective. But how was it funded? Some historians argue that the missing gold from the Königsberg helped bankroll von Lettow-Vorbeck's army long after Germany's supply lines were cut. If true, the treasure may have been dispersed in small payments, traded for weapons, food, and loyalty, spent coin by coin until nothing remained. Still, others believe the gold was hidden in a remote cave or buried near a now-forgotten German outpost, waiting, perhaps still undisturbed beneath layers of jungle growth. In 2010, a group of amateur explorers claimed to have located a sunken cache just upriver from the wreck. Their equipment detected dense metallic objects beneath 20 feet of silt. Funding fell through before a full excavation could begin, and in the years since, that portion of the river has flooded repeatedly, reshaping the terrain and burying the coordinates in ambiguity. Could modern technology, ground-penetrating radar, advanced sonar, finally reveal what the past has kept hidden? Or has the gold, if it ever existed, already changed hands too many times to ever be traced? Skeptics argue that the entire notion is little more than legend, a romantic tale born of war and loss, inflated by time. They point to the lack of solid documentation, the failure of multiple expeditions, and the logistical challenges of smuggling large amounts of gold through enemy territory. But others remain intrigued by the gaps in the record, the unanswered questions, the missing papers, the coincidental absences in ship logs and personnel files. Sometimes, what isn't said tells the most. And so the mystery remains. Was the SMS Königsberg carrying a fortune when she slipped into the Rufiji? Was it gold for war? For escape? For silence? And if it was taken ashore, where does it rest now? Beneath the reeds of the delta? In the soil of a forgotten camp? Or in the memory of those who carried it, never to speak again? We may never know, but the river does. And it, like the war it witnessed, still keeps its secrets. As we leave behind the muddy waters of the Rufiji Delta and the vanished fortune of the SMS Königsberg, we arrive now at a very different landscape, one carved not by tide, but by shellfire. Here, in the heart of northeastern France, the land still bears the scars of artillery bombardments more than a century old. The trees stand twisted, cratered earth gapes like old wounds, and beneath the moss-covered stones of Verdun, a mystery waits in the silence. This is Fort Douaumont. Once the mightiest stronghold in the defensive ring around Verdun, Fort Douaumont was meant to be impenetrable, its stone casemates and reinforced tunnels a last bastion against German assault. In February 1916, the German army captured it without a shot being fired. By the time the French retook it 8 months later, tens of thousands had died in the surrounding fields, and the fort itself had become a grim symbol of war's devastation. But within the grim statistics and battle reports, a more elusive story lingers, one that continues to puzzle historians and researchers alike. It concerns a French unit, a company-sized group of men stationed inside the fort during the worst days of the siege. According to official records, they were last reported alive and accounted for in early May 1916. And then, they vanished. No battlefield burial, no prisoner of war documentation, no confirmed survivors. Just a gaping hole in the paper trail, and a question that refuses to fade. What happened to the lost company of Fort Douaumont? Some say they were entombed alive. It's a chilling theory, but one with some precedent. In May 1916, an accidental explosion inside the fort ignited a stockpile of shells and flamethrowers. The fire raged through the interior, consuming oxygen and suffocating dozens of men. Later, when German troops attempted to clear the wreckage, they discovered entire rooms filled with the charred remains of soldiers, some still clutching rifles, others crouched as if in prayer. Could the missing company have been trapped behind collapsed passageways, dying silently in the darkness while the battle raged above? French engineers explored the fort thoroughly after its recapture in October, but certain sectors remained unstable and dangerous. Entire galleries were sealed off, some permanently. Decades later, in the 1950s, efforts to reopen parts of the underground network unearthed bones and personal effects, but no full unit, no mass grave. Others suggest the soldiers simply fled in panic. Desertion, after all, was not unheard of, even among the bravest. The conditions inside the fort were nightmarish: flooding, gas, fire, and psychological strain. Could a handful of men have slipped away in the chaos, hiding in the forests or blending into rear lines under assumed identities? And yet, the bureaucratic precision of the French army, especially during wartime, makes such a disappearance without a trace highly improbable. Then there is the third possibility, one that borders on the spectral. Over the years, visitors and caretakers of Fort Douaumont have reported unusual phenomena within its walls. Sudden drops in temperature, whispered voices in empty chambers, and at least one instance where a guide claimed to see a group of uniformed men walking through a tunnel that no longer exists. Skeptics dismiss such stories as imagination, fueled by the fort's tragic history and claustrophobic atmosphere. But others point to a deeper emotional imprint, what some call a psychic residue, left behind by traumatic events. Could the lost company still be present in some way? Not in body, but in trace? There's also the matter of a peculiar diary entry penned by a German soldier stationed at the fort shortly after the May fire. Translated decades later, the entry reads, "They say there is a place we are not to go, a section sealed after the blaze, not because it is unsafe, but because it is not right. The French still there, watching, but no longer breathing." No further explanation was given. Another tantalizing clue emerged in the 1990s when ground-penetrating radar revealed an unexplored chamber beneath one of the fort's side passages. The chamber was never opened. It lies too deep, too unstable. But the anomaly remains, and with it, a flicker of possibility. Was it a storage room, a forgotten shelter, or a tomb? Officially, the French military archives list the missing unit as presumed dead. No inquiry was ever launched. The chaos of Verdun left little time for administrative closure, and so the records remain incomplete. No names, no graves, only absence. Why does this story persist, even when buried beneath layers of concrete and silence? Perhaps because it touches something deeper, the idea that even in an age of mass warfare, some deaths remain personal, intimate, and unrecorded. That in the middle of one of the bloodiest battles in human history, a single group of men could simply disappear, swallowed by fire, by earth, or by something stranger still. Was it mismanagement, misdirection, or a moment when history chose to avert its gaze? Even today, standing within the stone corridors of Fort Douaumont, it's easy to imagine them still there, marching down a corridor long since sealed, waiting to be found or remembered. What lies behind those walls still unopened? What story remains, locked in the echoing halls beneath Verdun? And what does it mean in a war so meticulously documented, when a company of men can vanish into nothing? The silence of Fort Douaumont does not offer answers, but it does invite the question. As the fading echoes of Verdun's lost company dissolve into silence, our journey drifts southeast, beyond the thunderous Western Front, past the snows of the Alps, into a world of dust, heat, and ancient stone. In the arid stretches of Mesopotamia and the jagged mountains of the Caucasus, the First World War was a very different beast, fluid, scattered, and far from the trenches. Here, beneath the golden haze of desert sunlight, or under the flickering oil lamps of remote command posts, a different kind of war unfolded. One fought in shadows, carried by whispers, and buried in cipher. It is within this forgotten theater that we find our next mystery, etched not in blood, but in code. In an archive in Istanbul, housed in a quiet corner of the Ottoman Imperial War Ministry's records, there sits a faded, leather-bound ledger. Inside, hundreds of pages filled with curious symbols, dots, slashes, and looping characters, none of which match any known Ottoman military codebooks. The language appears Turkish, but with irregularities. The structure mimics Morse in places, but then shifts into numeric sequences with no discernible logic. Dates match real military movements, names of cities appear, but always tangled in layers of apparent encryption. Some believe these pages contain genuine wartime field orders. Others are not so sure. What are these codes? Who wrote them? And why have they never been deciphered? During World War I, the Ottoman Empire, ally to the Central Powers, operated across vast, diverse terrain, from the sands of Arabia to the cold plateaus of Armenia. To manage communication across these sprawling fronts, the Ottomans developed a sophisticated network of telegraph lines and couriers. Encryption was a necessity, and their cryptographic units, known as Chiffre Hayatleri, were tasked with protecting the empire's most sensitive military communications. But while many Ottoman codes from the era have been successfully decoded and translated by modern historians and linguists, this particular set, dubbed informally as Cipher D, remains stubbornly opaque. Discovered in 1997 by a graduate researcher combing through uncatalogued military files in Istanbul, the Cipher D documents immediately stood out. Unlike other wartime orders, which typically employed clear structural formats and known ciphers, such as substitution alphabets or numerical conversions, these pages broke the pattern entirely. There were inconsistencies. Sentence fragments began with familiar military terms but ended in nonsensical strings. Entire sections repeated in mirror image patterns, while others used glyphs unknown to both Arabic and Latin scripts. Efforts to decode them using known Ottoman ciphers, including the modified Vigenère square popular during that era, failed completely. Were these genuine messages? Or were they something else? Perhaps decoys, designed to mislead or even disinformation planted by Ottoman intelligence? A 2004 study by Turkish cryptography historian Dr. Selim Aktaş proposed a radical hypothesis that the codes might not be purely linguistic at all, but rather contextual. That is, each set of codes could only be interpreted when paired with a corresponding environmental or temporal key, perhaps a known battle plan, a weather condition, or even a geographic location. In this view, without the proper context, the messages were designed to remain unreadable. But if so, what was the context, and who was meant to receive it? Some researchers note that Cipher D appears in records from early 1917, a time of deep instability within the Ottoman military structure. Arab nationalist movements were on the rise. British intelligence, under the likes of T.E. Lawrence, was penetrating Ottoman lines, and internal suspicion of treason ran high. Could these codes have been part of an internal counterintelligence program used only by a small, elite corps of operatives? Others suggest the origin may lie further afield. In 2012, fragments of similar code were reportedly discovered in a German U-boat logbook off the coast of Haifa. The journal, water-damaged and fragile, included what appeared to be a copied Ottoman message, one that mirrored Cipher D formatting. The implication? These messages may have traveled through German hands as well, perhaps representing joint Central Powers operations unknown to mainstream history. Even more speculative theories abound. Some propose the codes were a form of proto-steganography, hiding not tactical data but ideological messages. Propaganda or spiritual guidance encrypted for field imams or political officers. One surviving memo, translated imperfectly, may reference the hand of Saladin and the day the shadow passes thrice, phrases more poetic than practical. Others, careful not to stray into conspiracy, have noted the resemblance between some symbols and ancient Turkic runes, last used centuries before the war. Could the codes have been a kind of nationalist nod, a secret link to a pre-Islamic heritage, encoded in a time of imperial decline? Or are we simply over-interpreting a field cipher whose key has long been lost? The Turkish General Staff has remained largely silent on Cipher D. Requests to examine the original documents are often delayed or denied, citing fragility, cataloging, or security policy. Theories persist that similar documents may exist in British or Russian wartime archives, still untranslated or misfiled under more generic categories. As we consider the undeciphered codes, we return to a central theme of war, its hidden dimensions. Battles are fought in mud and fire, yes, but also in ink, in silence, in misdirection. The Ottoman field codes may never reveal their secrets. They may remain as they are, mute witnesses to forgotten plans, silent strategies buried beneath layers of meaning and dust. But their very existence reminds us how much of history lies not in what we know, but in what we almost understand. What plan, what fear, what revelation might still linger in those symbols? And if the key to these codes was ever passed along, where is it now? Or, perhaps more hauntingly, who still holds it? As we leave behind the whispers of Ottoman cryptography, we now journey to the quiet cliffs of coastal Europe, where the wind carries not voices, but echoes of a different kind. They rise from the earth like forgotten monuments, immobile, silent, monolithic. At first glance, they resemble broken parts of a fortress, or perhaps the unfinished bones of some ancient machine. Concrete hemispheres and arcs, weather-streaked and moss-covered, facing the sea with patient, listening intent. These are the sound mirrors, early acoustic detection devices developed before the age of radar. Though often associated with Britain, lesser-known variants believed to have been deployed or studied by German military engineers during the First World War have emerged as a mystery unto themselves. What were these great listening walls truly meant to hear? Why do some of them appear in regions far from any known strategic necessity? And could their story suggest an intelligence effort that stretched deeper and earlier than most wartime records admit? Let's begin with what we know. Before the invention of radar in the 1930s, nations invested heavily in the possibility of sound-based early warning systems. With the growing threat of aerial warfare, especially Zeppelin and bomber raids, the ability to detect approaching aircraft before they could be seen became a matter of life and death. To that end, acoustic mirrors were designed, parabolic structures that could focus sound waves toward a single listening point. Trained personnel equipped with stethoscope-like headgear could detect the hum of engines miles away, often minutes before the planes themselves broke the horizon. In Britain, dozens of such mirrors were constructed along the southeastern coast from Kent to Yorkshire. Their forms varied: dishes, arcs, and even full concrete circles, and records of their use date back to the final years of World War I. But here's where the mystery begins. In 2011, a group of amateur military historians hiking along the western edge of Belgium, near the former front lines at Newport, stumbled upon a peculiar structure. Partially buried in a wooded slope, it bore a striking resemblance to Britain's known sound mirrors. A shallow, curved wall angled toward the northwest, with embedded metal fittings and a collapsed observation post nearby. No Allied maps from the period list a fortification there. No German engineering logs mention acoustic detection stations near the coast. And yet, the structure was real. Subsequent investigations uncovered similar ruins near the German-occupied town of Ostend, as well as a crumbling arc wall outside Kiel, believed to have been part of an abandoned naval listening post. Were the Germans experimenting with sound mirrors before radar as well? It's tempting to say yes. After all, the science was known. Publications in both France and Germany from the early 20th century explored the potential of paraboloid reflectors to amplify faint signals. And given the German Empire's early development of Zeppelin fleets, it seems plausible they'd have pursued countermeasures against aerial threat, just like the British. But what raises eyebrows is where some of these mirror-like structures have been reported. One, now lost to erosion but recorded in a 1983 East German survey, was located not near a coast, but in the Harz Mountains, hundreds of kilometers inland. Another, discovered by forestry workers in Alsace-Lorraine in 1995, featured not a parabolic dish, but a deeply recessed stone channel, seemingly designed to funnel sound upward from the forest below. No formal acknowledgement of these devices has come from modern German archives. Were these truly military in nature? Or might they have served some other, more secretive function? One theory, grounded in speculation but not entirely without merit, proposes that these inland mirrors were part of a failed German attempt to track artillery echo patterns, triangulating shell impacts by listening to their reverberations through terrain. If successful, this would have allowed command posts to calculate enemy gun positions without exposing scouts to enemy fire. Another, more provocative hypothesis links these mirrors to clandestine listening posts used not to track enemy machines, but people. Could sound mirrors have been part of counterintelligence efforts used to eavesdrop on Allied troop movements, or even civilian communications in occupied zones? Even the Allies themselves took this possibility seriously. British intelligence in 1917 briefly investigated concrete acoustic apparatus allegedly used in Antwerp to intercept Morse-tapped wire transmissions from underground telegraph lines. The project was ultimately dismissed as implausible, but not before sketches resembling mirror arrays appeared in a Royal Engineers Field notebook. And then, there are the unexplained rumors. Among the more persistent oral histories from coastal Flanders is the tale of the Listening Hill, a low ridge said to have once held a concrete structure manned by German engineers who never spoke, even among themselves. Locals claimed that in the stillness of early morning, the structure whispered, amplifying the sound of birdsong and footsteps for miles around. Some say it was destroyed by retreating German forces in 1918. Others insist it collapsed into the ground during a storm, its true purpose never understood. Skeptics argue these so-called German sound mirrors are misidentified bunkers or collapsed radar testing platforms from the Second World War, and in some cases they may be right. But in others, the construction style and materials match pre-WW1 engineering practices, and their positioning, facing routes of known Allied air raids, makes coincidence unlikely. If these structures were part of a broader German acoustic defense system, then why have so few been documented? And why are even modern military historians hesitant to claim them as authentic? Was the technology deemed ineffective and quietly discarded? Or were these devices part of an experimental program whose records, deliberately or otherwise, never survived the war? We may never know the full story. Yet as these massive, silent sentinels continue to weather the winds of Europe, one cannot help but wonder, what sounds were once captured in their cold, curved faces? What conversations, what warnings, what secrets did they hear? And who was listening? And most of all, are we only beginning to understand the kind of war that was fought not just with bullets and bombs, but with the silence between them? As we step away from the silent sentinels of concrete that once listened to the skies, we move toward a different kind of silence, one shaped not by stone but by air. And in the sodden heart of Belgium's battlefield past, silence was rarely peaceful. Passchendaele. The name alone evokes images of chaos and desolation, mud that swallowed men whole, artillery shells carving the landscape into a grotesque tapestry of craters and corpses, and above it all, the low moan of wind threading its way through shattered trees and open wounds in the earth. But among the many horrors reported during the Third Battle of Ypres in 1917, one account stands out, not for its violence, but for its eerie calm. They called it the Devil's Wind. And to this day, no one can quite explain what it was. The ridge near Passchendaele rises only gently above the surrounding terrain, barely noticeable in peacetime. But in war, that elevation meant dominance, visibility, advantage. It was a place men fought to gain and bled to keep. British and Commonwealth soldiers who pushed across the battlefield in late 1917 faced near impossible conditions. Months of rain had turned the soil to soup, drowning artillery, immobilizing tanks, and turning every step into a gamble. But then came something stranger. Several platoons advancing near Goudberg Spur reported the same phenomenon on different days. An unnatural stillness preceding what they described as a howl of wind that came not from the sky, but from the ground itself. The sound was low, tremulous, rising in pitch as it moved across the battlefield. Some said it began with a sudden drop in temperature. Others felt heat. Some were convinced it came from the east. Others said the sound spun around them, echoing without a clear origin. There was no physical storm, no artillery barrage. And yet, the wind came, and with it, something else. Official reports logged in late October 1917 mention an incident in which an entire forward observation team abandoned their post, claiming a pressure wave had driven them back. They described difficulty breathing, dizziness, and in one case, spontaneous nosebleeds. These symptoms were initially attributed to gas, phosgene perhaps, or a residue of chlorine trapped in shell holes. but no gas shells had been deployed in that sector that week. Chemical detectors remained inert. An inquiry was opened, but quickly dropped. Privately, however, some officers began collecting testimonies from men who had encountered the so-called Devil's Wind. These accounts shared an unusual consistency. The air would hum. The ground would tremble. And then, voices. Whispers, not in English, not in German, but in a language no one could place. Some likened it to radio static, others to chanting. A few claimed to hear names, familiar ones, spoken clearly just before blacking out or fleeing the trenches. Skeptics chalk it up to a combination of stress, battle fatigue, and environmental distortion. After all, the terrain at Passchendaele was a natural amplifier. Waterlogged craters and splintered tree lines can carry sound in unpredictable ways. Some historians believe that air pressure anomalies, caused by the clash of high and low fronts over the ridge, might have triggered infrasound. These extremely low-frequency vibrations can't be consciously heard, but they've been shown to cause nausea, fear, and hallucinations in lab conditions. Could the Devil's Wind have been a rare meteorological event? An invisible force disrupting both mind and matter? It's possible. But that explanation does little to account for the precision of the accounts, or for the timing. The strange wind always seemed to precede a major assault or withdrawal, as if anticipating human decisions before they were made. And then there's the matter of the recovered field journal. In 1953, a Belgian farmer clearing out a ruined barn near Passchendaele unearthed a mud-caked officer's satchel. Inside was a battered notebook, dated October 1917, belonging to Lieutenant Harold C. Ray of the Royal Engineers. The final entries are erratic, scrawled hastily with broken grammar and repeated phrases. One passage reads, "It's here again. Came through the shell scar like smoke. Didn't feel wind, but everything bent. Trees, grass, hair. Men fell to knees. Sound like iron scraping ice. Tomlin heard singing, not right, not human." The notebook ends mid-sentence. Ray was never listed as killed in action, nor does he appear in post-war military roles. He simply vanished. Could there have been an undisclosed weapon test at Passchendaele? Some fringe theorists propose the German army was experimenting with sonic warfare, acoustic disruption devices that targeted enemy trenches with sound waves. While such technology was explored in the interwar period, there's little evidence of it being deployed in 1917. And yet, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. British intelligence did report strange earth tremors along the line in late October. Unexplained radio interference was also noted, despite the minimal use of wireless communication at that point in the war. Could the Devil's Wind have been an unintended side effect of experimental weapons? Or was it something older? Local folklore tells of a cursed wind that sings through the soil during times of great bloodshed. Some villagers refer to the ridge as Hellewind Heuvel, the hill of the Hell Wind. Long before the First World War, it was said that horses refused to graze there, and shepherds lost their way under blue skies. Was the land itself speaking through the chaos of war? Or was the war simply revealing something always there, waiting beneath the mud and ruin? Even now, when storms roll in over Passchendaele, there are those who swear they hear it. A low tone, just at the edge of hearing. A pressure on the chest. A whisper in the earth. A wind that never touches your skin, but moves through you all the same. The Devil's Wind has not been recorded. It left no photographs, no scientific logs, no formal mention in the war diaries that survive. But its memory endures, in the notes of forgotten officers, in the stories of men who survived when others fled, and in the uneasy silence that sometimes falls across the ridge without warning. Could it have been nothing more than the madness of war echoing back through time? Or might the soil of Passchendaele still hold secrets no trench map ever marked? And if the wind returns, who will hear it next? The North Sea, late spring. Cold, endless. A vast sheet of gray under a sky nearly indistinguishable from the water itself. Out here, direction seems arbitrary. The horizon dissolves. The wind tastes of salt and iron. Somewhere beneath these icy waves, pieces of history still rest. Hulls torn open by shellfire, turrets twisted by explosions, entire warships lost in the fog of war. Among the greatest of these clashes was the Battle of Jutland, fought between the British Royal Navy's Grand Fleet and the Imperial German Navy's High Seas Fleet on May 31st and June 1st, 1916. It was the largest naval battle of World War I, a conflict that spanned over 250 ships and claimed more than 8,500 lives. But while the thunder of guns has long since faded, one question continues to echo across the century. What happened to the missing orders that may have changed the course of the battle? The Battle of Jutland was, by all definitions, a confused affair. Despite the enormous fleets involved and the rigid structure of naval command, many of the crucial maneuvers were marred by poor visibility, communication failures, and split-second decisions made under extreme pressure. Vice Admiral David Beatty, commanding the British battlecruiser fleet, was famously quoted after the battle saying, "There seems to be something wrong with our bloody ships today." But some historians have wondered if the problem went deeper. The key moment came late on the evening of May 31st, as the British Grand Fleet, under Admiral Jellicoe, attempted to bring its full force to bear on the retreating German fleet. But instead of pressing the attack, the British hesitated, allowing the Germans to disengage under cover of darkness. Later inquiries would reveal that orders meant to coordinate a pincer movement, a maneuver that could have cut off the High Seas Fleet completely, were either never received or never sent. And to this day, those orders have never been found. How could something so critical vanish amid one of history's most documented battles? The Royal Navy kept meticulous logs. Dozens of ships involved in the engagement recorded movements, signals, and commands. Flag signals, semaphore, lamp flashes, and early radio transmissions were used to communicate between vessels. Yet somewhere between the bridge of Jellicoe's flagship and the captains awaiting instruction, the link was broken. Some reports claim the missing orders were encoded, sent via wireless but never decrypted due to cipher delays. Others suggest the orders were never sent at all, halted by Jellicoe himself amid concerns of a German torpedo ambush. But conflicting accounts muddy the waters further. A few officers later claimed they saw the orders, or at least a draft of them. Others remember verbal commands that never appeared in the official records. And one account from a signal officer aboard HMS Iron Duke mentions an unusual quiet on the command deck during the decisive hour, as if a message had been expected, but didn't arrive. So what really happened? One theory posits a simple clerical error, a misread code, a broken transmission. In the chaos of battle, such a slip is not unthinkable. The primitive wireless sets of 1916 were unreliable at best, especially under conditions of high electromagnetic interference and heavy gunfire. But another line of thinking veers into the realm of intentional suppression. Could someone have deliberately withheld the orders? After the war, some naval analysts quietly questioned Jellicoe's judgment. His caution, they argued, allowed the German fleet to escape, preserving its threat and prolonging the war at sea. Yet Jellicoe was widely respected, and no direct evidence of wrongdoing has ever surfaced. Still, whispers remained that the Admiralty had known of German fallback plans through code-breaking efforts, but that the information was classified and not fully shared with frontline commanders. That decisions were made not to annihilate the German fleet, but to maintain a balance, preserving post-war naval parity in anticipation of political upheaval. Could it be that orders were lost not by accident, but by design? Adding another layer to the mystery is a document known as the Hague Memo, an obscure piece of naval correspondence recovered in 1933 from a private estate in the Netherlands. This memo, unsigned and undated, refers to tactical recommendations withheld from Field Command at Skagerrak, the German name for the Battle of Jutland. The language is vague, couched in bureaucratic terms. It references long-view strategy considerations and mentions loss acceptability thresholds. No definitive link has ever been established between this memo and the events at Jutland, and its authenticity has been debated. But it remains a tantalizing artifact in a puzzle that seems to defy resolution. Wreckage from the battle still lies deep beneath the sea, scattered across the seafloor like pieces of a giant chessboard. In recent years, exploratory missions have begun mapping these wrecks, using sonar, remotely operated vehicles, and underwater drones to recover artifacts from the battle. But as yet, no evidence has been found of the missing orders. No coded message tucked inside a watertight safe. No sunken archive waiting in the dark. And yet the mystery persists. Why, at the moment of potential victory, did the British fleet hesitate? Was it simply the fog of war? A broken chain of communication? Or were darker currents at work? Currents shaped by politics, misdirection, or quiet sabotage? The Battle of Jutland has been studied for over a century, with entire careers built on analyzing its timelines and tactics. But the absence of one crucial message, an order that may never have existed, continues to haunt the history books. Was it lost to the sea, buried in bureaucracy, or was it never meant to be found? And if it were discovered today, what truths might it finally reveal?